Rules Committee will come to order, and thank you very much for joining us this morning. Both Mrs. Slaughter and I made a decision last night that rather than being up at 3 in the morning, we would do this now. And Louise, I want to thank you for getting up again another morning. Yeah, these days are coming. Welcome back to the Rules Committee. This morning, the committee will be considering House Amendment to the Senate Amendment to H.R. 1370, providing for further continuing resolution, as well as H.R. 4667, making further emergency supplemental appropriations for disaster assistance for Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, Maria, and calendar 2017 wildfires that are consuming California, and other purposes. This short-term continuing resolution will extend government funding through January the 19th, 2018, with certain defense anomalies to help alleviate stress that is put on the United States military, our fighting men and women, by this continuing resolution. The CR provides funding for community health centers and funds the CHIP program through March 31st, 2018. The second bill under consideration, H.R. 4667, provides $81 billion in emergency funding for disaster relief. This emergency funding will continue the efforts that have been underway in recovery, not only in Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands, but across the United States in affected areas along the Gulf. This impact came from natural disasters. This is absolutely critical for the people and our friends of Florida, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and of course my home state of Texas to answer the call of the things that happened. Before we go too far, I want to make sure that my dear friend, the ranking member, gets time to welcome some of our guests. I was told we had special guests this morning, and we do. I thought it might be Santa Claus, but it's Mrs. Pelosi, and we're delighted that she's here with us. The gentlewoman's recognized.
This morning. Thank you. We certainly are pleased to have our leader here this morning. And let me say, I'm sorry we're here again today. This is the third CR this year, and apparently we're going to be having another one in March. So we governed by CR, leaping from disaster to disaster. And I hope that we can make some kind of New Year's resolution that we can try to get to regular order and really know what we're doing. I tell you, we found it pretty upsetting to be here again. 2 days before we have the government shutdown, actually tomorrow. But we literally should not, Mr. Chairman, leap from disaster to disaster, letting other things go. There are a number of other issues I think that we're not going to be addressing. I know that you put some money in for the CHIP program, which covers 9 million children, but to take away their vaccine money is so appalling that I don't know how anybody could, with a straight face, vote for that. The county health center, community health centers, when we were defunding Planned Parenthood, they said, oh, all the community health centers can take care of all that. So now their money is gone. And we did not do a thing here to address the opioid epidemic. Kills 91 Americans a day. And the disaster relief, I'm glad that there is a bill on that today, understanding that's a freestanding bill. But we're here discovering one more short-term funding measure because the priority for this Congress was to pass that bill, and that the president himself admitted yesterday that the main part of that bill for him and the glory of that bill was the corporate tax cut. For a man who said all along that he wasn't going to benefit from it, and that it was for the forgotten man and woman and for the middle class, he absolutely admitted yesterday exactly what it was for. And then everybody gets in a bus and goes down there and celebrate, and consequently, we were up last night till 10:30, 11 o'clock. This is serious business. This is the United States of America. We're obliged to keep this government going, keep the lights on, and to deal with the people's problems. And so here we are. I'm happy to have our leader here today, and Ms. Lujan Gresham. They're going to talk about 800,000 young people who desperately need help from us. And so I'm happy she's here today. And thank you for your consideration last night that we might get to go home and
Yes, ma'am.
sleep a little bit.
Yes, ma'am. I think it's important to note that, in fact, the things that you talk about are issues before our country. There are issues.
Well, yes,
before this
they
Congress.
are, but we're not dealing with them,
Well,
and that's the problem.
Do you mind if I defer to the gentleman from Texas, Dr. Burgess, to give us a quick update on CHIP? Dr. Burgess?
Thank you, Chairman. We've talked about the State Children's Health Insurance Program up here multiple times. The authorizing committee did provide the language for continuation of SCHIP for 5 years, which was the request of committee Democrats and both Republicans and Democrats on the Senate side. I personally had wanted a 2-year extension, but the 5-year extension was the one that we marked up in committee. It was offset with what I consider are responsible offsets. But as a consequence of us passing it on the floor of the House, it was never considered in the United States Senate. So the expiration dates have long since passed, and many states are now exhausting the funds that the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services was able to adjust and make available for states. So in the continuing resolution, there is short-term funding for a number of public health extenders, community health centers, teaching health, graduate medical education, National Health Service Corp, and special diabetes program for children and Indians. Spending totals $704 million and is paid for with money out of the prevention fund. It also includes
Excuse me, I'm sorry,
$2.85 billion for CHIP,
Dr. Burgess, did you say it paid for out of the pension fund?
$704 million transferred from the prevention fund.
Prevention fund, yes.
It also includes $2.85 billion for CHIP with special rules so that the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services can transfer funds to shortfall states. Actually, this provision does not score because CHIP funding is included in the baseline, and this should easily get states through January 19th. Now I'll yield back to the chairman.
Great, thank you very much. And Dr. Burgess, I want to thank you for being not only the subcommittee chairman for health for Chairman Walden, Energy and Commerce, but for your duty and service to us. And as always, as we try and keep ourselves up with this important issue, I want to thank you for doing that now. Thank you very much. Okay, before we go too far, by the way, Mr. Hoyer, we're delighted that you're with us too. I'd like to
Morning, Mr. Hoyer.
like to take a point of personal privilege to thank a member of our staff. We do this from time to time, Mrs. Pelosi, as they leave us. Nate Blake, one of our lead senior professional staff members here at the Rules Committee. And I want to thank him for his years of service for us. Nate is a graduate of Florida State University, began his service on the Hill in 2001 with Congressman Jeff Miller, former colleague of ours. He went on to serve my predecessor, Sir David Dreyer, as a legislative director before joining the Rules Committee in 2013. Nate is leaving us at the end of the year to pursue new opportunities with a small company called Amazon. So congratulations, Nate. Nate's wife said she wanted him to have a job during the waking hours. And so, Nate, congratulations, and congratulations, best of luck.
We want to congratulate Nate as well. He's been wonderful to work with, as all of your staff, and I think my staff is. One thing we have in common are extraordinary people who work with us.
Well, we
Nate, we
do.
wish you the very best. We are hoping to get Amazon to come to Rochester, Buffalo. We have so if you could throw any heft our way, we'd be most grateful. Thank you.
Well, he will have great influence
Yeah.
he can tell him he knows the gentlewoman
Absolutely.
from
Go
Rochester.
right to Bezos.
So we're going to both welcome the first panel. We really did not have any witnesses that would have been here, but we have 3 special guests right now. And so we'll put 3 chairs out there. If we get our clerk, Ms. Booth, to please add a 3rd chair. It's my understanding that we'll be joined by the gentlewoman from New Mexico, Ms. Grisham. And so we're going to welcome our three witnesses. Mrs. Pelosi, it is a distinguished honor to have you, and Mr. Hoyer, it is a great honor to have you also. And so we'll put you here, and we'll get you some water here in just a second. And we'd love to have you come be on the first panel.
You know,
Oh, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. A very dear friend of ours from
right.
New Mexico, who has,
You know she's running for governor. You know she's running for governor.
I did want to make that announcement, but I knew she was my favorite Tridel.
Oh,
We help each other on housing for students, and so she helps greatly in the effort that we do. We're trying to get more student housing on campuses all across this country, and you're not only a leader but a very vivacious person to help us lead that effort, and thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, how kind of you to say. Thank
Well,
you for
it's,
your leadership in that issue, too.
yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am. Just don't call the question. Just don't call the question. If I could get, Ms. Booth, if you could please make sure that our guests all have something, water. Mrs. Pelosi, we are honored that you are here. You coming to the Rules Committee is special for us. As you know, the Committee of Republicans and your team that are here are dedicated to meeting almost every day for hours a day, and they handle very sensitive matters for us, and some things that every single day shows up ready and prepared. And quite honestly, in my years of being on this committee, I've never once been disappointed with their presentation or the effort and advocacy that they've given on behalf of your party and Mr. Hoyer's party. So we're delighted that you're here, and for the gentlewoman to be given the time, we now yield to her.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee, to our ranking member, Congresswoman Slaughter. We're very proud of her work as well as of all of the members of the committee. Although Mr. Chairman and I have had our policy differences, he knows that I respect and admire his family enormously, and that is the connection that we have, whether it's his sister, his mother and father, and the rest, and Mr. Sessions.
Then you got
as well.
stuck with me. You know, Nancy, you may or may not know this, but my mother pretty much tells people how proud she is of all of the children, except for Pete. And Pete had no ambition, so he became a member of Congress. so you can tell I don't do so well at home.
Give her my love, please,
do
and
that. Thank
Susan's greetings. Okay. I'm sorry.
Represents the majority of the American people.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Ranking Member, members of the committee, I join your distinguished chairman in commending the members of the Rules Committee. I always say in our caucus, pay special tribute to our members and likewise to all of you for the service that you provide to the Congress, because as you know, you're out better than any of us. Your hours are extraordinary, unpredictable, and you probably know more about all of the issues before the Congress than most members. Well, Cindy and I are appropriators. We think we know a full brief of what's going on in the Congress, but the Rules Committee certainly does in real time. So thank you, all of you, for your service, members of the Rules Committee. I'm in awe of all of you, and I thank you for your service. The issue that I'm coming to talk to you about today is about the continuing resolution. And just to put it in perspective, I'm disappointed in what the CR that is before us today, because we had hoped, and if I just may, knowing that you know this, but just to stipulate to some fact on it, one of the issues that is of disagreement so far in how we go forward with our funding for the next 2 years is the issue of the caps. What are the caps that Mr. Cole is an appropriator. He knows how important it is for us to get to the cap so the appropriators can get to the business of writing the bill that will be now in January, maybe sooner than even the 19th at the expiration of the CR. And in the caps, it's 5437. We are calling for parity parity is not 54-37, and that is part of the disagreement that we have right now. We have gone to the president and to our Republican colleagues to say between 37 and 54, let us address some of the issues that are completely bipartisan, in fact, nonpartisan. Let us address the opioid epidemic, which has broad bipartisan support, address the further needs of our veterans who are part of our national security, and also issues that relate to the increased funding at the National Institutes of Health. I know Mr. Cole is a champion of that and his important role at in his subcommittee, and also issues that relate to emergency in terms of pensions in our country. None of these are partisan in any way, areas that we have really come to agreement on many aspects of them. And so in the absence of that, we have very serious concern about this continuing resolution as it goes forward, and in terms of where we go with the caps, because we're not addressing with money. We have policy, the president has a good policy on opioids, but you have to have the money to go with it, and that is where the difference would be between the 37 and the 54. And I remind the committee that in the $37 billion increase, as opposed to $54 billion, that the domestic discretionary non-defense budget, as Mr. Colwell knows, is also has a big national security function. In that budget is State Department, Homeland Security, Veterans Affairs, and also the anti-terrorism activities of the Justice Department. So that those are strong national security functions, but they're counted not on the defense side, but on the domestic side. So the lack of an increase on the defense side is harmful also to our ability to have the national defense function met. So in that spirit, we come here to say we have problems with the CR, how veterans are dealt with. I respectfully disagree with Mr. Burgess in terms of the offset in the bill coming from the Prevention Fund. As our distinguished ranking member said, this is coming from the Prevention Fund, where we have children inoculations for children, we have addressing lead poisoning, issues like that. So we don't think that children should have to pay, children's health should have to pay for children's health. As you may know, there are bipartisan conversations going on for other pay-for, so disappointed that we resurrected this bill, that the Walden piece of the Walden bill, which was, as you mentioned, not taken up in the Senate, and that we opposed on the floor because of the pay-fors. But CHIP, the Children's Health Insurance Program, I think you called it state CHIP. I'm still calling it S-CHIP because we've been going back a long time on that, is nonpartisan. We have bipartisan support for that, for community health centers, for the other items that Mr. Burgess mentioned in his comments. It's the offset. It's the offset. It's how the veterans are dealt with in the bill. It's the so we have some concerns about this CR and its construct, what it doesn't include, and how it includes what it does. And one of the things that it does not include is an opportunity, we think, for something that also has strong bipartisan support, not only in the Congress, but across the country. And that's what I want to focus on right now. I would hope that that this distinguished committee would allow for a rule for us to take up the DREAM Act. The committee should give the American people a vote, give the American people the opportunity to attach the DREAM Act to this CR. The committee can act to ensure that we not only keep government open, but to keep the American dream open as well. By an 84-12 margins, Americans believe that Dreamers should be allowed to stay in America and gain legal status, including 77% who support a path to citizenship. 81% of independents want citizenship for the Dreamers. Of independents, 57% of Republicans want citizenship for Dreamers. The 3 Bs, the badges, our law enforcement, the Bible, our health, our faith-based groups, and the business community all strongly support the DREAM Act. Oh, the Center for American Progress found, according to analysis by the conservative Cato Institute, deporting DACA recipients would cost taxpayers $60 billion. The Center for American Progress found deportations would cost our economy a staggering $460 billion over the next decade. Cato is addressing the deportation. Center for American Progress is talking about our productivity as a country. The courage, determination, and optimism of the Dreamers makes America stronger and more prosperous every day. The Dreamers, with their hopes, dreams, aspirations, and the dreams of their families to make the future better for the next generation, well, that's an American value. And in committing to that American value, these Dreamers make America more American. They embody the best of our nation, patriotism, hard work, perseverance. We should not leave them to celebrate the holidays in fear, watching their DACA protection expire, dreading being deported from the only home they have ever known. This is not and should not be a partisan or political issue. I was telling the president when we met with him recently that at his holiday party, I mentioned to him it was called a holiday party. I thought it was a Christmas party, but it was called a holiday party. That is, holiday party. Many of our Republican colleagues said to me how supportive they would be of DREAM Act. But what was interesting is many of your spouses told me that as well. So I think there is a spirit of family in all of this, that we have many more issues to address in terms of immigration in our country. This discrete one is one where we have total bipartisan consensus, so it's not a partisan issue. Congress has a duty and an obligation to protect these Dreamers. The committee should take this opportunity and give the bipartisan DREAM Act, it's bipartisan, a vote on the floor. I'm very honored to be joined by our distinguished whip, who has been a champion on this issue over the years, and also by the chair of the Hispanic Caucus. If they will, and I can further add to why it is necessary for us to do this in terms of what is happening to Dreamers now in terms of their loss of status. But I'm going to yield to my distinguished colleague, Mr. Hoyer, to make, and the distinguished chairwoman of the Hispanic Caucus, to make their presentations. If you have further questions about that after you hear our testimony.
Ms. Pelosi, thank
pleased
you
to
very
answer.
much. We're
No,
delighted
thank you.
that you're here, and without objection, anything you brought in writing, the gentleman, Mr. Hoyer, Ms. Lujan Gresham, whatever you brought in writing would help our awesome stenographer as she completes the record. The gentleman from...
If I may, Mr.
Yes,
Chairman, I want to join you in thanking Nate Blank for, and wish him well, Amazon,
Nate,
and thank him,
let me
and
tell you
all
what,
of the
he's got
staff.
precious children that are going to enjoy seeing their dad at Christmas also.
Isn't that lovely?
And during the waking hours.
And in saluting him, let us salute all of the staff. All that I said about all of you goes double for the staff in terms of their
Yes, ma'am, it
commitment.
does. And thank you for, as I highlighted, your amazing members, also the amazing members that are here in the majority. And I don't know if you know, but we have Liz Cheney down at the very end there. And Liz is a firebrand for us and a distinguished member of the committee. That way you can see her also. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're
Thank you,
delighted
Mr.
that you're
Chairman.
here and will engage you. As you know, we will offer our members that opportunity to welcome you also. Mr. Hoyer, we're delighted that you're here. The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, gentlemen. I adopt all the amazing accolades. Articulate.
That microphone.
Okay,
Watch that water. Watch the water.
Well, does that improve it? Or now you can hear me and perhaps you want me to move the mic away. You know, I love to tell the story. Paul Sarbanes was speaking to a group of about 400 people, and a guy in the back of the room raised his hand and said, "Senator, I can't hear you." Immediately, a guy in the front row said, "I can, and I'll trade places with you." So anytime you want me to shift the mic, Doctor, I'll do it.
Mr. Hoyer, do you remember the story about President Lyndon Johnson, who was in a meeting and Bill Moyer was giving the prayer? This is as reported. I was not there. And Bill Moyer was praying, and the president said, "Speak up, I can't hear you." Bill said, "Mr. President, I wasn't speaking to you."
I won't go into what he thought, meaning the president. Hanukkah just came to a close. We are 4 days from Christmas, and we are 9 days from the end of the year. And much of the work that this Congress needs to do is undone. And so we find ourselves some 24, a little more 36 hours from shutting down our government. And until late last night, perhaps early this morning, we on our side had no idea of exactly what was going to be proposed. We're now here at the Rules Committee at 8 a.m. in the morning to decide what we're going to do this afternoon. And we have not been included in the discussions. And that's unfortunate. Clearly, we need to address many issues. Leader Pelosi has spoken of them. We have not passed a single appropriation bill to the President of the United States. We're not in control of anything. Not a single appropriation bill has gone to the President of the United States. Not one. Yes, we passed some through the House. Matter of fact, all of them through the House. But the Republican leader did not put a single one of them on the Senate floor. So we find ourselves not only with no appropriation bills funded, but we also find ourselves with no agreement on the levels of spending that we will address, the caps. We've been urging to come to an agreement, and we had an agreement under Ryan Murray 4 years in a row, which said we would have parity. Parity seems pretty simple. 2 plus 2, 2 and 2. Or whatever number is chosen is parity. But we've been unable to reach an agreement. So we find ourselves here with not only no appropriation bills done, but no guidance to the Appropriation Committee at what level they should fund their legislation. No way to make an agreement. So we find ourselves again with less than 48 hours left to go. We voted for a CR overwhelmingly. It was a no-drama CR in the middle of September, which allowed us to have 90 days in which to resolve the issues that confronted us. And frankly, the only thing was considered was a tax bill, which we think is a disaster. You think is a real spur to the economy. We have a difference of opinion on that. But that's what we spent our time on. We did not resolve any of the substantive issues in that 90 days. And so we had another CR 2 weeks ago. We didn't vote for it because we thought, correctly, the only thing that was going to be paid attention to was the tax bill. And none of the issues for which you voted for a CR, you got 90 of your people back, and because they thought it was just 2 weeks, that it wouldn't really damage defense as much as they thought it would in September when they voted against it. 90 of your colleagues. CR would not have passed. That 90 days, we would have had a crisis in September. Had Democrats not stepped up to the bar and said, okay, let's work together, let's get these issues resolved. We didn't do that. You spent all your time on your tax bill. The previous 10 months, you spent most of your time on repealing the Affordable Care Act and taking health care away from millions of people. So we have some very significant policy differences, but we need to come to agreement. And we have no confidence that any extension is going to get us to further agreement. Mr. Cole, Ms. Pelosi, and I, we served on the Appropriations Committee. We came to agreements. But we have come to no agreements. And once again, we find ourselves where we're going to kick the can down the road. We're not going to tell defense what money they'll have for the next 9 months, 8 months. We're not going to tell the Department of Energy or the Labor, Health, Human Services, Department of State, Department of Commerce, other departments of governments and agencies. We're not going to tell them how they can plan for the next 9 months. Any business that did that would go bankrupt in a short period of time. It is a terrible way to run the government of the United States or any other enterprise. And so we find ourselves here no closer to agreement, frankly, than we have been in the first 11 months. And I have had discussions with your majority leader, our majority leader. with whom I deal in a constructive way on many issues. And I told him that there were a number of issues that we felt were necessary in order for us to participate in helping the majority party, which has extraordinary difficulty running this government. You're a deeply divided party. We saw that last night on the floor of the House of Representatives. I don't know whether you've resolved those differences in the last 24 hours or not. But it is clear that without our participation in September, you would not have passed a CR. Government would have shut down. But we hoped during that time we would have had some ability to work together. I told the majority leader as long ago as August that the DREAM Act had to be resolved. The President took an action in September that your Speaker urged him not to do. As a result, it put at risk some 800,000, really 1.6 million, young people who've grown up in America, who believe America is their country and gone to elementary school, junior high school, and high school, have worked in jobs, have gone to school, have served in our military. And they're twisting in the wind. Rush Limbaugh said, we're not going to send those kids home. We've said, we're not going to send those kids home. The President of the United States says he loves the Dreamers. There is no excuse for us not having put a bill on the floor to resolve this issue. Over 300 members of the Congress of the United States will vote on that when you put it on the floor. So the only reason it's not on the floor is because the leadership has refused to do so. That was very important to us. And I've talked to the leader over and over again. I've raised it in colloquy over and over and over again. Opioids, which the leader has spoken of. VA choice, we should have resolved that bill. Perkins Loan Program, we should have resolved that issue. Community health centers, we should have resolved that issue. Medicare extenders, we should have resolved that issue. Fire grants, we should have resolved that issue. And yes, the Dreamers as well. But here we find ourselves less than 48 hours before the end of the year, or before the end of the current CR. And nothing has been resolved. No discussions have led to resolution of these issues. Everybody's reading their phones. Perhaps what I'm saying is not relevant. But on our side, we feel it's relevant. And you have needed our votes on almost every fiscal issue that has passed this House. Because so many of your members, you have over 218, you could pass anything on your own. And you pass the tax bill on your own. So when you want to pass things on your own, you create a consensus to do so. But on almost every fiscal issue, on one fiscal issue that John Boehner, Mr. McCarthy, and Mr. Scalise asked you to vote on, actually, I guess it was Mr. Boehner, Mr. Cantor, and Mr. McCarthy, you got 84 votes to join the three of them in order to keep the government open. And over 125 of your members voted no, not to keep the government open. And the director of OMB voted not to open up the government when you shut it down for 16 days. So I come before the committee saying, if you're going to offer a rule that is going to make in order some amendments or some alternatives, if you expect our help, you ought to put in things that we think are important, and we'll have a significant number of Republicans voting with us, including, I presume, many of you. I don't know that. So I come before you saying, you have 36 hours to keep the government open. We don't have the votes to keep the government open. We don't have the votes to shut it down. And the American people have given you the responsibility to do that. And if you've got the votes, you don't have to talk to us. But if you don't have the votes, we really need to come together in a bipartisan way to be the responsible stewards of this government. So I would urge you to include initially an amendment which says that those dreamers will no longer be twisting in the wind. And that we will give them the assurances that the President of the United States says he will sign to give them. This is not a question where the President of the United States said, I'm going to veto that bill. He said he would sign the bill. He said it to Leader Pelosi and Leader Schumer, and he said it to the world. So we think that needs to be in there. We think we need to deal with the VA. We think we need to deal with FISA. But we need to deal with them in a constructive, bipartisan way. And if we don't look to us for help, because we're not included. We're shut out. As the tax bill. No hearings, no witnesses, and a conference that was a fraud. The only thing Democrats did in that tax conference was able to make a statement. No amendments, no suggestions. That's not regular order. But much more than that, it's not fair. It's not what the American people expect of us. So I come to you asking for certainly that amendment. I ask as well, because I understand you're considering the supplemental, your tax bill and the supplemental bill undermines Puerto Rico. 3.5 million, 3.6 million Americans, as well as the Virgin Islands. They still have 35% of people in Puerto Rico without electricity. If 35% of the people in Houston were without electricity, it would be a national scandal. You would all be outraged. You would not allow it to happen. And the tax bill treats Puerto Rico as a foreign government. They are Americans, fully a part of the United States of America. And if they want to come to Florida or any place else, they come. Why? Because they're Americans. So we believe the supplemental also needs to be revised in a way that treats Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands as full partners of the United States of America, not as foreign governments. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this opportunity. I would ask that I submit a dear colleague, which has been sent by Tim Walz to colleagues, expressing his deep concern about the extension of the VA Choice Act, which he thinks will undermine the VA because it's not a full bill dealing with the needs of the VA and veterans' access to health care, doctors, beds, et cetera. I would ask, Mr. Chairman, that that be included in the record at this time. And last, and closing, I would say, I really do believe we can do some very good work if we do it in a bipartisan way. And will I have to give something? Yes. Will you have to give something? Yes. That's the democratic process. We are not pursuing that. And that's why we find ourselves in this conundrum 36 hours before the government's going to shut down. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, anything the gentleman brought right will be entered in the record. And I appreciate the gentleman for his not only comments, but for his time this morning to come before the Rules Committee, including his colleagues from the Democratic Party. Ms. Lujan Gresham, we're delighted that you're here. I'm going to have you make sure, there you go. Awesome.
Green, ready to go.
Yes, ma'am. Woman's recognized.
Thank you very much, Chairman Sessions, and thank you also Ranking Member Slaughter and committee members. This is my second time before the Rules Committee, and no matter what time of day or how late it is, and as nice as you are, it's still a little intimidating, particularly if you've only been here 5 years and you're joined by two incredibly seasoned, productive members, and I'm lucky to have them here, and I associate myself with all of their remarks. And it's interesting that, well, we're, as you can see, giving you a passionate, I hope, plea for, we have an opportunity. You know, I always see the glass as half full. 48 hours, 36 hours, that's plenty of time, and we could do something today. I have no doubt about that. And maybe it's because of the kind of work I've gotten to do, not only with members of this committee, and I want to thank so many members who I've gotten to know in the 5 years, and I appreciate, Mr. Chairman, your remarks about working on housing. While I go home and people get a little bit upset at me about partisanship here, and there are issues, and I thought the whip did an effective job saying that we all find ourselves caught often in partisan aspects that make it difficult for us to do the work that we really want to do and that we think makes a difference in our communities. At the end of the day, there are so many folks, including on this committee, that I've had the great honor of developing a relationship with. But some things that people may not know, and Mr. Chairman, when you first came here, maybe it was a year and a half ago, and you knew that I was from the land of enchantment. New Mexico is an incredibly beautiful, wonderful place with incredible challenges, and we have a tendency to just focus on those challenges. It's a place that has huge persistence pockets of poverty, and yet we have more PhDs per capita in my district than anywhere in the United States, I believe, still today. We have an incredible number of veterans per capita. We have an incredible number of dreamers, and we also have a diverse population with one of the largest numbers of independent tribes also in the country. And so it gives me a unique perspective. And in fact, I grew up when the Children's Health Insurance Program didn't exist. And I'm the oldest of three, and my sister, the youngest of three, at 2 years old, was diagnosed with the same brain tumor that now Senator McCain is struggling with. Interestingly enough, my sister, diagnosed in the 60s, lived to be 21, which then was unheard of without these kinds of programs. And while I didn't realize it then, I watched my parents try to figure out how to negotiate and pay for care without having any coverage for the entire time until she died when she was 21. So I get this, how important getting these issues right and getting these programs funded. And in fact, I ran the Department of Health. And when we would run out of funding and I would have to make calls to families telling them I wasn't sure how we were going to navigate care for a child also like my sister with a terminal disease or cancer, it's compelling. And yet, trying to figure out how to navigate it all, veterans who don't have access to housing or clinics. I've got a 2-star hospital we just had in Indian country, Mr. Cole. We just found out that we have one of the worst VA clinics in the country. So I know we're compelled to do the right thing. And here, in addition to those things, and it's not a lecture, it's about figuring out, particularly now in this incredible season, we can do something. I know we can. And I'm here offering the amendment on the DREAM Act. And I do think it is incredibly bipartisan. The last time I was here, Ileana Ros-Leviathan was in this committee. As you know, she's been a long champion of dreamers in this population. Something I'm embarrassed to admit to you today, but it doesn't make it any less true, even though I'm the chairwoman of the Hispanic Caucus, that until that role, while I was clear about dreamers and mixed status families, my brother, I have mixed status families in my own close family network. But it wasn't actually until I sat down with 2 dreamers for coffee that as they talked to me about their story, I don't think I really understood what it means to be 15, 16, and to join your friends from high school and to go get a driver's license. And to have no idea that you're not a citizen and that your parents have protected and shielded you. And now so many things make sense about your community, about your neighborhood, about why you couldn't go out, about why your friends were really, that whole effort was narrow, that you couldn't, college may not want you to join a sorority. They may not want you to be in high school clubs that would lend you to those productive academic and social activities that lead to lifelong relationships. I had no idea. Or when they go to college, so they get this, they find out that they're not eligible for most services. They have no idea that they're not citizens. And many of these families, they have American-born siblings, which means they're the only one at risk. So imagine that you're 7, and now the whole family's talking about what it means to have the 16-year-old who's not a citizen. And what happens if that 16-year-old is in somebody else's car even, and they get stopped for a brake light or for anything else, and you're detained and deported. And in many communities, including communities in my state, these young kids are picked up. Their parents don't get notice for hours, sometimes a day or more. Can you imagine? I'm a mother of 2. I've got a 32-year-old and a 30-year-old daughter, and now I got a 2.5-year-old granddaughter, and she's incredible. I don't think I can imagine how I would feel if I had no idea where my 16-year-old was for 24 hours. And then when I found out that I couldn't do anything about it. So this is an incredible opportunity. And I've sort of focused on the stuff that's really harrowing and hard, but they're here and they're participating in this process and they're making a difference in our economy. 20,000 of them are educators. In states like Texas and Oklahoma and New Mexico, we don't have enough individuals who are willing to do public education and teaching. We need these young people. And they're doctors and lawyers and practitioners in every kind of healthcare sector you can imagine. And they're doing long-term care and construction. They really are the backbone. And we ask them, it's like telling everyone they have to be a valedictorian. We set the bar incredibly high, and they meet it. What other population could do that? They did. And here's the part that's really compelling, I hope. I've talked to many members, both sides of the aisle, who say, well, we do have till March, and we want to get it right. And we want to make sure it's as bipartisan as it can be. And there's a ton of bipartisan work that's been going on since well before September. It has, and I want to thank you for that. We have not, the caucus, our caucus and the minority caucuses, particularly for the Democratic caucus, have been welcomed and invited to, I can't tell you how many, either Republican only or bipartisan caucuses. So I want to thank you for that, because it's been a really robust effort. But the notion that it's okay, it's not true. 122 a day lose status. They're immediately fired. Immediately fired. We have a young man in Pennsylvania with a toddler, a son, American citizen, went through a routine checkpoint, out of status, detained, being deported. We have another gentleman, Macron, who is an entrepreneur with 3 companies. He loses status on the 22nd. He can no longer do that work. It doesn't make any sense to me that, particularly when I end with my state, which we have one of the worst economies in the country. I want people working. I want young people working. I want everyone to have these kinds of opportunities. And I have to tell 122 in this country every single day that they're going to lose their jobs. And I have to tell the faith-based community and the ag community and the construction community that they're going to lose these employees. And we have an opportunity right before Christmas to do something about it. And so I offer you this amendment for the DREAM Act. I really urge you to consider this is our time. And we could demonstrate not only to the House, but to the Senate and the rest of the country that our work since well before September paid off, that we've answered the questions, that we understand this population, that we know the impact that they have, and that so many of us are ready to support Dreamers and their families so that we don't tear these American families apart. So thank you for having a meeting this morning, and thank you very much for having me testify before you. It's always an honor, and I appreciate your generosity where you don't interrupt and we take way too much time, sir. But these are really important priorities to us, and I am grateful to be here. Thank you.
Ms. Lujan Gresham, thank you very much. As each of you know, this committee, as the time that I've been chairman, is very open. We're very open to hearing from any person. We'll even keep the lights on late at night. We welcome people. I have believed that we're a better Congress when everybody's able to represent the people that they represent by talking in front of their colleagues. So you being here is an honor for us. It's an honor for you to take your time to want to come and place yourself before the committee. I will address, if I can, up front, your request. It's a request from each of you, and it's a common request that I have been a part of for a long period of time. I don't intend to throw anything back on you. Do not hear me say that, because I need to address today the responsibility that I have to answer today. But I will say that my former governor, George W. Bush, when he came up to Washington, he challenged Republicans and Democrats, members of Congress, to address the issue as he had addressed in Texas under his statutory responsibilities to address the issue. education, tuition, a number of other factors. He was unable to get it done, Republican Congress and Democratic Congress. He was unable to make headway, and he worked on it a lot every day. It eluded your majority. It eluded your majority because it is a hard issue. And I throw not anything at you, please. Do not hear me do that. It is my responsibility. So I have looked at your committee members for a number of years, including Mrs. Slaughter, Mr. McGovern, Judge Hastings, and Mr. Polis. And we have, over the past years, spoken about this issue. As you know, we have had a working bipartisan group of Republican members, many from the Southwest, who intensely wanted to bring resolution, a balanced resolution, to the table. Very controversial, very hard. I don't believe anything should be harder than the success. I don't believe anything should be our impediment. But I believe that what the president did, whether you agree with it or not, is highlight the issue and say he believes it should be done by the Congress. I believe when the President Trump, challenged us, that day we accepted the challenge. And he gave us an ending date. And I believe that my party, I sit as a member of our Republican leadership team. The gentleman, Mr. Collins, sits as a member of the Republican leadership team. We have accepted that challenge that has been going on since President Bush, at least. Through all of President Obama, we have accepted that challenge, and I fully anticipate that we will be able to come up with a plan that we may present not only to our members of Congress, but really the American people, to highlight a full debate, just as one might do under health care or one might do under tax policies. We're going to engage MSNBC, Fox, NBC, CBS, CNN, all the stations. We will have members of Congress that go and debate this issue, and we will highlight to the country to influence policy about what the right thing to do is. But it will not be done in this bill. And the reason why is because I believe that what we're trying to do now is to finish the work that had begun and was done. Mrs. Lowy comes up here with Chairman Frelinghuysen, and they presented their bills. Chairman Cole as an appropriator, welcoming them, and we on what I think was a genuine bipartisan basis had an opportunity to move through the bills, rightly or wrongly. It wasn't always 50-50, I acknowledge that. But it was done with space and influence to accommodate getting bills across the line. The most important thing my job is, and I've always tried to focus on my job, is to make the things done that I had to do. And it is funding the government. It is taking care of this disaster relief. And it is making sure that we accommodate the bulk of making sure that we take the funding of the government and moving it forward. I am absolutely opposed to every CR, even though I vote for them, the CRs, because I know that the ability to effectively manage the government is more important than putting them off at a month at a time. But I will address the issue right now and tell you, I will not recommend that we take your bill, but I will invite you back. And I will invite you to not only bring your legislation that you have, but I will invite a Republican plan, because there will be that bill. There will be that alternative bill that we can weigh and measure. And it might be the same, it might be slightly different, but we will address the issue. We do care very much about this issue and have for a long period of time believed that it is right and it is respectful to address this issue for so many young people.
Would
And
the
so
chairman yield when you finish?
I would yield to the gentleman. Well, you'll be given time. We've now started, as we always do, where the panel has finished. I, as chairman,
Mr. Hoyer has to leave.
I don't intend to block her. I listen to her. I'm not lecturing to anybody.
leave.
I'm providing
No,
an
no,
answer
it's an
back
answer.
and
Okay,
the
okay.
ramifications of that. But I will tell you that we will follow a pathway that we have started going down. And that is to make sure that by the timeframes, we're addressing the issue.
Mr. Chairman, may I be excused?
I have one question for the gentleman.
Yes.
The gentleman talked about the conference, the tax conference, and your disapproval of that. Can you tell me about the conference that was done on the Affordable Care Act years ago?
I can tell you at length.
I did ask you. There's the microphone.
Scott Brown was elected. We lost our 60 votes, and your side refused to go to conference because you thought you would defeat the bill by not going to conference. You refused to go to conference to discuss making the bill better, resolving the differences between the Senate and the House bills, and making better the bill in its final form. That is why we had no conference, because we could not get, we had 59 senators, and neither Scott Brown nor any other member. And Mr. McConnell asked, don't do anything until Scott Brown gets there. We asked, don't do anything on your tax bill until Mr. Jones gets here. In the one instance, both President Obama and the Senate Democrats accommodated Mr. McConnell's request that Brown be allowed to be seated before they acted further. And in this instance, Mr. Jones was not seated. And the person who had lost the primary, who had no mandate whatsoever, Mr. Strange, was allowed to vote.
Well, you've highlighted exactly what I wanted to talk about, and that is whether it's 59 or 52, it is a problem for either party. And it is a part,
If you would reach compromise with the
52, well, it was a
48
problem even with
Democrats.
59. Mr. Hoyer, I want to, before you leave, excuse me, does anyone on this side intend to engage Mr. Hoyer, who's attempting to leave? A gentlewoman is recognized. We will, Mr. Hoyer, Mr. Hoyer.
I'll tell you, Mr.
Excuse
Hoyer.
just a
If
moment.
you
Yeah,
wouldn't chain
okay.
me to this chair, I would have left.
Yeah.
Excuse
But
me
there
just
you
a
are.
moment. We do allow you to have unlimited, virtually, opportunity to come speak with us. But we reserve that right back, that same opportunity to the panel on a fair basis. Does the gentlewoman seek time?
Yes, I do.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, we go through this every day, and we've been shut out of everything here as well. We've had nothing but closed rules, structured rules, so we're not getting amendments. We have nothing. This is continuation of what we see on the floor. It is amazing to me that this most compelling evidence I've heard in a long time. All three of you have been extraordinary. And it's like paying for the children's health care by taking away their vaccination money. We don't ever seem to reach anything. We have enormous power on this committee, absolutely enormous power. There
it's
is
called the
no
Powerful
reason,
Rules Committee.
there is no reason in the world that we could not put this amendment in order and get this done. As I asked the other day when we were trying to get the medal upgraded for that veteran who's dying to the Congressional Medal of Honor, that we had a letter from General Mattis saying he would like to see that done, and we couldn't do that. As an act of mercy. For heaven's sakes, Mr. Chair, we have sat here all
Gentlewoman
week.
yield?
Well, yes, I do. Because I'm a Southern woman, I
Yes,
will.
ma'am. Well, you and I spoke about that. And there
Yes.
was some understanding that in fact, we were being asked to waive all regulations. But the facts of the case are really simple, that we received the request at 10 minutes before we were going to have the meeting. And I will be quite blunt. When you serve your country and receive an honor that this particular gentleman did, that is the second highest award. When you have an act of valor, you're not awarded 3 different types of awards. And he was selected for that, and you do not get both awards. And so we did not understand if we would be waiving to take that away, and you know this.
This isn't helping Mr. Hoyer
Well,
get
it may
to
not
where
be
he has to
helping, but you
go.
brought this up.
Well,
and I just respond back.
I
It's not like I
brought this
ignored the
up
issue.
because we sit here time after time, hours, 14-hour days, working on Rules Committee, and we, like everything else that was been brought
I
up,
gave
is
you a
when we
fair
don't get
answer,
anything
though.
done.
I tried to resolve the
Well,
matter.
I understand you tried to, but
Chairman, I don't have.
Gentlewoman has the time.
Will the gentleman?
please, indeed.
With no disrespect to any one of you on the committee, I have a whip meeting, I chair the whip meeting, and I know all of you want me to be at the whip meeting. Because you need us, and we may talk about that.
Okay. The gentleman, hold just a moment. You intended. to
No,
engage the
Mr. Hoyer,
gentleman
you
first.
should go to the whip
Mr. Hoyer,
meeting.
does anyone here wish to engage the gentleman for? Well, this is fair.
I'm not sure I want the gentleman at the whip meeting.
Notwithstanding that, Mr. Hoyer, your request is pertinent, and we will address this.
Wisdom of Mr. Collins.
I will say this quickly, because I did want to respond to a number of things my friend said. I'm not going to delay him to listen to it, but I will do that, and I'll do it in a respectful way. And it's just always a pleasure to have the leader, have the whip, have my good friend, Ms. Grisham, here. And we were delighted to have you here. But, you know, if you're a little slow getting to that whip meeting, that's okay, too. Stop, have a cup of coffee, you know, calm down.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hoyer, in fact, I do recognize, but it is fair if you come get your licks at us, that we're entitled to offer back to the gentleman. And I will tell you that I do not believe that we got a fair opportunity to engage the gentleman, but he did get a fair chance at us. And so I would like for you to know you're welcome back whenever you'd like to come. We respect you for the job that you have, and we respect you that you've got to go do your job. So the gentleman is dismissed as he chooses. Thank you very much.
Well,
With a
the
gentle wave
leader
in the
has to go as well.
Yes.
Yes.
No, but I have time. I just, if it were you,
We're
Gil?
going to give the gentlewoman, let me say this. I did not finish my questioning.
But
I
I
am
wanted
not
to answer
trying to-
your question.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I wanted to, because I wanted to join you in singing the praises of President George W. Bush. He has been the best president on immigration, and it was in his heart and in his head, and he knew the issue. But you posed a question in your remarks, or a comment, that I think needs to be
Yes, ma'am.
addressed. And that is, when we won the House, and we went to our first meeting with my being Speaker with President Bush, he said, now we can pass immigration reform. We're sitting at the table, not a big table, just the leaders, the president and the vice president. And Senator McConnell said, no, Mr. President, we can't. And he said, well, why? We have co-sponsors for the immigration bill. And Mr. McConnell said, just because they're co-sponsors doesn't mean they're going to vote for it on the Republican side. It's the 60 votes. And that's what the president couldn't get, was the 60 votes. And let me just say, he was in the tradition of his great father. He was in the tradition of Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan and George Herbert Walker Bush protected a higher percentage of people in their executive orders than Barack Obama did. Higher percentage of people. In fact, President Obama acted because Congress didn't act, but President Reagan acted when Congress acted. And he said, you didn't do enough. We're going to do family fairness. And he expanded the protections. And President George Herbert Walker Bush continued that work. So the two of them, the Republican presidents of our era, President Reagan, President George Herbert Walker Bush, and President George W. Bush, not to mention President Clinton and President Obama, have all been pro-immigration. This is the first president that we have had, and certainly the first Republican president of the modern era, who has been anti-immigration. Now, on the subject at hand.
Yes, ma'am.
On the subject at hand, I do believe that there was not an awareness on the part of the president in our conversations. It's obvious of what happens to the students. It isn't that you are protected until March. You lose status every day. As the chairwoman said, well over 100 lose status every day, which means because these people have to work, serve in the military, or be in school. You know, there are requirements. But if you lose status, you can't do any of those things. And it's more than well over 10,000 have already left status. Every day they lose status. So that's why March is almost an irrelevant a date. What's relevant is they lose status every day, and some of them, even though the White House is not fully aware of all of this, are subject to deportation. So that changes the dynamic.
Urgency.
The urgency, and that's why we are here. It's not, well, we want it sooner rather than later. No, it's to address what is happening every single day. And in all fairness to this White House, I don't think they realized the lack of status. I don't think the president did, because I think the president really wants to do this. I think he thought he was, I don't agree with what he did, as our speaker didn't agree with what he did, but nonetheless, he didn't think it was jeopardizing their ability to retain their status. I don't think he understood that. Well, maybe understood or not, but didn't understand the numbers of people involved. And I don't believe some of the people who were advising him on immigration did either. But I go back to your point about President George W. Bush. He has spoken, even in this administration, so beautifully about it and said, when you're talking about immigrants, do so with respect for them as people. One more point. The Senate did have a comprehensive bipartisan bill that the Speaker, Mr. Boehner, would not bring to the floor of the House. So for them to come up with
That is true,
That is
and I
true.
acknowledge
So,
that.
but you said how Democrats or Republicans, we couldn't get 60 votes when we had the majority. We could get 60 votes when the Republicans had the majority, but it was not allowed to be brought up in the House. But getting back to this point, the urgency and why we are here is not just to hasten the calendar, it's to address the danger that these people are
But I
in.
wanted to make sure that I answered the question. The gentlewoman and I are very good friends.
No, you answered it.
I go to church with George W.
Isn't it beautiful? I love his family. And
George W. and I attend the same church. We hear the same message. It's a message of hope and opportunity, notwithstanding I'm a Methodist, so we've got some problems there probably. I know you would.
For you.
Yeah. But my church prays for people.
and the Methodists do.
Yes, ma'am. We do the best we can.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I wanted to address that directly. We consider this vitally important also. We're addressing the needs of the nation in two particular areas today. And you came to this committee to give your testimony, and we're delighted that you're here. We're going to continue now through our process that we have, but I want you to know that I gave you a response that we intend to have that brought before the committee. And I've looked at this, gentleman.
But that will be mañana.
That will be in probably late February or March. Does the gentleman?
Mr. Chairman, just to put a
totally
fine point on it with a question, if you don't mind.
Yes, sir.
I believe that in light of the fact that there's a discharge petition with a significant number of members having signed it to bring the DREAM Act to the floor, do you believe, as I do, that if the DREAM Act was on the floor today, that it would pass?
Here's what I believe. I believe that there are significant questions of exactly how we're going to make sure that the American public understands what we're doing. And I believe it needs to be a national debate. And I do not believe that it would actually be appropriate just to bring something to the floor without a debate and understanding of that. So I would say to you, I am a part of a process. I have had my own immigration plan for a number of years. I once again see former President George W. Bush on a semi-regular basis, and he is passionate about this issue. And I am his congressman, and he expects me to get things done. Trust me, I get those things too. But it is a process here that is engaging a group of people that want to get it done, not a group of people that don't want to get it done.
Right. Well, Mr. Chairman, most respectfully, the question that I ask you is undergirded by the fact that 34 Republicans, including our colleagues here on the Rules Committee, sent Speaker Ryan a letter urging immediate action to protect our dreamers. And so do the math, Mr. Chairman. If the DREAM Act were to come to the floor, it would pass. And I ask again, do you feel as I do? Never mind about all this stuff about the debate. There's been a lot of debate. Children here every day discussing the matter. We've discussed it here in this committee repeatedly, asking the same question. Mr. McGovern, Mr. Polis, Ms. Slaughter, myself, members on the other side have discussed the matter. Do you believe it would pass if it was on the floor?
I do not in its present form.
All right. Well, we disagree.
We might disagree, and that's okay, Judge.
Mr. Chairman,
Excuse me just a moment, please. Does the gentleman seek?
would the gentleman yield?
The gentleman's recognized.
Well, I just felt compelled. I think perhaps Mr. Hastings was referring to me. I was one of those 34 who sent a letter to the Speaker and our leadership asking that we address this issue by the end of the year. Absolutely. I meet with dreamers from my district, from around the country on it. In fact, I think I've got a meeting with some of them in about 40 minutes. So I may have to miss some of your testimony. I apologize for that. There's no doubt, I think, that if there was a bill on the floor, that it may receive a positive vote. But there's one vote that we have to keep in mind, and I think it wasn't quite clear when Mr. Hoyer made his statement that the president had said that he would sign the DREAM Act. I don't know that I remember that. He has said many positive things about Dreamers. He believes that we need to do the right thing by them. But he's also made it clear that he wants some things besides the DREAM Act. A clean DREAM Act, at least from my understanding, is not something that he supports. He wants other things so that we can prevent these young people and people like them from being put in this position again in the future. And so if it may be true that a clean DREAM Act would pass, but I don't know that it would pass in the White House. Then that's one vote that we absolutely need. And in my estimation, Mr. Chairman, this is an issue that is very important. It really is. And we have really one shot at getting it done. And I want to make sure, and I think many of us on a bipartisan basis want to make sure we get it done correctly. We don't want to take that vote, Mr. Hastings, and then have it vetoed by the White House, because that would not only be a waste of everyone's time, but it would raise the hopes of these young people unnecessarily
Would the gentleman yield?
and then be dashed.
If the gentleman would yield, first
I would.
ask unanimous consent that the letter authored by Mr. Taylor and Mr. Newhouse be made a part of the record where the
Without
34
objection,
members
we'll enter that.
And then I would.
Thank you for that, by the way.
Yeah, I would urge the gentleman that if the president vetoed the measure, 2/3 of the members of Congress could override his veto, and I believe it would be overridden.
Perhaps, I'm not sure there's a guarantee we could do that, and if we couldn't, then what? Then what? And so I think it's incumbent upon us to do it right the first time. Not use this issue as I know it's important to a lot of people, but recognizing that we need to have a complete package to satisfy not only the House, and not only the Senate, but also the White House.
Will the gentleman yield?
Mr. McGovern, absolutely.
Then what the hell are you waiting for? I mean, we've been talking about this for months. And as Leader Pelosi and Ms. Lujan Grisham pointed out, people are losing their status every single day. Maybe the president doesn't realize that. Maybe the Speaker of the House doesn't realize that. A couple of weeks ago at a press conference, he said, well, we have until March. Well, we don't. People are losing their status right now. And by the way, these dreamers, I mean, some of them work in Fortune 500 companies, some of them are in school. Some of them are leading.
If I could reclaim my time.
Some of them are leading the relief efforts to save lives. And I just want to say.
Excuse me. The gentleman is reclaiming his time. We're attempting to stick to what we would do. The gentleman will be given time, and the gentleman is aware of that. The gentleman has reclaimed his time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. McGovern. And it's early. It's a little early in my estimation for four-letter words, but if that's where you want to go, I understand. This is a passionate issue. Everybody feels very passionately about this. What are we waiting for? Well, that's a good question. There's many people in a bipartisan basis working very hard on this issue. They really are. My understanding is that just in the last few days, a bipartisan group of senators met at the White House and I don't know what was agreed on specifically, but apparently there's some commitment to work on this, get this done in January by those individuals with the president. So if that's the case, the pressure's off from the Senate. It wasn't our doing. That was something that was already worked out, that there's going to be something happening next year. And so what are we waiting for? I guess that's what we're waiting for now. But we've been continuing to work on this, as you know. Many of us in this room have been working on it for a long time and still want to get it done. So it's not our fault that we're not doing it right now. There's a lot of other people that have a say in what happens, as you know, in this town. But it is something that I agree with the chairman. This is a discussion that not only Congress has to have, but the American people are engaged in this as well. It's not something, in my humble opinion, that should be attached to a spending bill or year-end CR. This is an issue that I believe can stand on its own merits, can pass overwhelmingly in both chambers and the White House on its own merits.
Give us a vote.
After it has the necessary and I think important debate and discussion, which is happening, you're right, but as you know, it needs more. And frustrating as that is, and this place can be very frustrating, I think that would behoove us to do that in order to get it done and give these young people a lasting legislative solution. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back. I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate the passion, but thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I would like to say every single member of Congress has an opinion on this issue, and in particular, this committee does. And you have been well represented virtually every Rules Committee meeting we have on this issue where there's been a discussion that has helped push us. I want to respect both your time and our time. I'm going to defer my questions. I appreciate you taking time, but I'm going to follow the process that we normally do. That way we respect your time. The gentleman from Oklahoma.
Yeah, I am going to take issue with some of that, with all due respect, Madam Leader. You had 4 years where you were in the majority. There was never a bill submitted while Democrats were in the majority. You had an overwhelming majority with President Obama. So to come in and demand a vote outside the process when you had 4 years, you know, I do take umbrage at that and do disagree. In terms of the bipartisan bill, you have to remember the Senate passed a bill with a third of the Republicans, 17 if I remember the exact number. So there were over 30 or 31 or something opposed. So it's very seldom that a Republican House is going to put on the floor a bill that basically a third of its members in the Senate voted for. I don't think you would have put a bill on the floor that a majority of your members would not support. That's very unusual for any speaker to do. It does happen on occasion. Speaker Boehner certainly did it several times. You were very helpful in those occasions. I think we did good work together, and frankly, I always voted for those bills to keep the government open, whether it was when President, I guess all those were when President Obama was in office, and certainly have done so when President Trump was in office, and again, as you guys pointed out, fairly. But this idea that, you know, for 4 years Republicans stopped it, when for 2 years we couldn't stop a lot of things. Again, I see this differently and recall it differently. Certainly want to give my friend an opportunity to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Mr. Cole, I have a question for you after as well. Well, I'll tell you right now.
Sure.
How many hours do you have in a day to serve on Rules Committee and Appropriations? You are really quite a champion in the Congress to do that. And as Mr. Cole knows, left to their own devices, I say this as an appropriator, the appropriators can reach agreement.
I agree.
Respect for the camaraderie of that committee. Mr. Cole, thank you for your question. In 2010, we passed the agreement in the House of Representatives. Maybe we're not aware of that. We didn't get 60 votes in the Senate. So that, just for the question, let the record be clear, we did pass the bill in the House. And that was
Excuse me, the record be clear, we passed it in 2010 in the House. We didn't get 60 votes in the Senate. Now, I just wanted the record to be clear on that. The world has even changed since then. The awareness in the public mind of the Dreamers, the urgency of it all is so much more now. And I want to tell you, to to follow the path of the distinguished chairman to start talking about this in February to take it is an act of extreme cruelty. An act of extreme cruelty when we know what the consequences of that would be. The time for discussion is coming to an end. The time for decision is now. And that is why we come here to plead with you to say, help these dreamers. These are people who are frightened. They are frightened, and they have challenges. They're serving in the military. They're serving in the. They're working. They're going to school. They're constructive. People are, whether it's the business community at the highest levels, appealing to the Congress to take this up. I agree with Mr. Newhouse in that this issue is a bigger issue. We have bigger fish to fry in terms of immigration, and that is where we can take up so many of the other issues. And yes, the president I think he will sign this, but he does want a border considerations, and we have been engaged in those negotiations as well. But you can't do everything. We're just saying, let's protect the dreamers, and then all these other issues. We're talking about like 1/7 of the people in our country whose status we have to address. So there's so many, whether they're immigration issues, whether they're border issues and the rest, that are part of the larger discussion. We're saying right here and now, we have an emergency. We need a decision. We would throw ourselves on the mercy of this committee, not ourselves, but these dreamers on the mercy of the committee.
Would the leader yield? I agree with everything that's been said. Immigration reform requires additional attention. It is incredibly complex, and it's a problem on so many fronts. And we've been debating this for 20 years. And people have been waiting, including businesses and the Faith Committee, for Congress to figure it out for 20 years. And I don't suggest that in the next 6 months, to Mr. Newhouse's point, that's going to be an easy path, which is why—
3 months.
3 months, the dreamers, but we've been doing it for the last 3. Dreamers are a separate issue. It's like not wanting to fund the children's health insurance program while we're debating with you today about its timing. That would be like saying we're not going to entertain it for months until we figure out additional health care reform. It is a very separate, clear issue that requires immediate attention because literally people lose their lives. People lose their lives in detention. We've got suicides are up. They lose their jobs. We have childhood trauma. We had pediatricians here in Congress who were testifying. It really is an emergency. And I worry that I haven't made a very good case for that. And I didn't want any member of the committee to misunderstand that we think somehow Dreamers should be a replacement for, in terms of that policy for immigration reform, or that we think that there's been sufficient bipartisan effort, although I might argue that 20 years is a long time for this country to get policymakers at all levels to figure it out. We have been doing that, but this is a very select, specific issue that I think has much broader bipartisan support as a result. So I thank you, Madam Leader, for yielding. I thank the committee for hearing me out.
Gentleman's time.
Thank you very much. A couple other things. And again, this is certainly not directed at anybody in this room, but we have finished all the appropriations bills, and we've been waiting 100 days for the Senate to just pass one. And I think that's an institutional concern. That's not a partisan shot at anybody. It's just, and I would expect our bills, when we sat down in negotiation, would change, because it would be negotiation. And the Appropriations Committees on both sides have honestly shown they can get to an omnibus. They've done it 3 times in a row. So they really haven't lost the art of splitting the difference and finding the middle ground. But the Senate has to participate. And frankly, and I don't direct this at anybody because I suspect everybody here is working in good faith, but we've got to have a common number. As my friend, distinguished appropriator before she was in leadership, certainly knows. And that's above all our heads at the Appropriations Committee. We've got to have distinguished leader and whip and our speaker and the majority leader and the president of the United States have got to come to a deal. Yeah, and once, well, when I said majority leader, I meant their majority leader. I probably shouldn't have thrown poor Kevin under the bus. Wasn't meaning to do that. But again, that is a tremendous frustration when we've been waiting this long, because we have been prepared to negotiate. So maybe if we're out of town, all the folks that have a hand in that decision can make that decision, and we can come back in relatively short order and do what I know we all want to do. I will say, and the distinguished whip spoke to this part, I don't necessarily agree with this one-to-one formula idea. I think it's a pretty clumsy concept, because I don't think it has anything to do with reality. Sometimes you might need to do more on non-defense discretionary. Sometimes you might need to do more on defense. So it's been a convenient tool, but I think, and it sort of worked, but it doesn't work as well when there's not a division, if you will, between the parties in terms of the branches of government that they control. So that's just my observation. I'll work with whatever number that you guys come up with. You know, I think all the appropriators will, but I think the formula just personally makes a mistake. You know, with that, I certainly want to give my friend a chance to reply, both of them, to anything they care to. And I appreciate this much of the leader's time. This is a lot of leadership time for you to come into a single committee and spend with us in a critical time. And it tells me how passionate you are and sincerely committed you are to the issue, and frankly, how respectful you are of this committee. And for that, I'm very grateful.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Cole and Mr. Chairman and your other committee, I've said to the president, left to their own devices, we take great pride in our culture as appropriators to find common ground, because we know the issues, as you know the issues here, but we know the issues that we're dealing with there, the committee does. I said to the president, left to their own devices, they can reach common ground. I think the speaker respects that as well. But as we are honoring the budget agreement, which is about parity. And as I said to the president, and I say to you, the difference between the $17 billion difference is all bipartisan. Opioid epidemic, veterans, NIH, for which you've been a champion, and I respect that, and some of the pension crisis that we face. If it isn't bipartisan, we weren't bringing it to the table. We weren't saying we were. But this issue, and I appreciate you using the word passion, but this is a very intellectual issue as well. And it's not even an issue. It's a value. This issue of saving this building is burning down, and we're deciding how much H and how much O is in the water that we might put on it. We just have to solve this. As you said, it's like the S-chip, I'm still calling it S-chip, the chip of the health care bill. It's something very discreet. It's about our young people. It's about hopes and aspirations, and that the American people fully support, and Republicans, independents, and Democrats as well. So it has that discretion. The other issue in terms of border, migration, all the rest of that, those are big issues that we have to deal with and welcome that discussion. I want to thank the chair of the committee because of the caucus, because they have been engaged daily, intensely, in a bipartisan way on how we can do something in this way, and also have some piece of the security that Mr. Newhouse very correctly points out. The president said, I want some border security in there. But you don't take the chip and then say, we're going to do everything we want to do on immigration, on the border, on DREAM. You know what I'm saying? That's a bigger conversation that we welcome, that we respect, and that we want to have sustainability in whatever the solution is. And I think the Congress is very capable of that. I think that the bill comes to the floor of the DREAM Act, it overwhelmingly passes from what members have said to us. So that's all we just want is a shot, just a shot. Just let's have a vote on it.
I want to associate myself with Mr. Newhouse's remarks, because I would feel more comfortable. I don't pretend to be an expert at this, but I would feel more comfortable if the Judiciary Committee would present us a product that they've debated. I think they will by March. And
March is to it. That is an act of cruelty.
well, I've seldom been accused of active cruelties. We have a difference of opinion. You know, sometimes I think the process would be helpful here. I think the dialogue that Mr. Newhouse referred to would be useful and healing for the country. And frankly, it would be a pretty wonderful thing for us in a bipartisan way to actually enact legislation reform in this area through. That's actually the way I prefer to go about it, is piece by piece. I mean, a lot of people differ. They prefer the comprehensive approach. I actually think it's easier. And I agree with you that I think this is an area where we can find agreement. I think people want to find agreement here. It's just legislatively, it's better if it comes up to the committee, in my view. I know there's a working group that's focused on this right now.
But it's 3 months since Speaker had that working group and it has produced nothing.
Well, we've not produced anything in years, so 3 months is not a long time. But let's see what happens here and let it run its course. And I think we'll be here, as my friend the chairman said, in relatively short order, early in the new year, dealing with this and presenting a product on the floor that has gone through and is a genuinely bipartisan product. That's what I would hope we could achieve. But there's enough to do in the time we have just to fund the government, in my view, and to take care of some of these other programs, to buy, frankly, the time that the people that make the final decision on the top line number, and I say this as appropriate, are desperately anxious to have a number. I'm sitting $8 billion apart from my labor age counterpart in the United States Senate. I can do it either way. I can have the extra 8, he can be at mine, or we can split the difference. I just need a number. So hopefully we'll have that opportunity. You certainly will have the opportunity to reply, Madam Leader.
No, I was just going to say I respect everything that was said, and I think the Judiciary
Committee is the appropriate place to take up the comprehensive immigration reform. We're just talking about this right now because they haven't taken it up, and it is an emergency. But, yeah, the full committee should be addressing the immigration issue.
I might say that in my conversations with particularly Republican judiciary members, there seems to be a great agreement on the facts about Dreamers, right? They're not a national security or border security issue, that they meet the standards, that the way DACA works appears from every data point that we have, bipartisan agreement, that they're going to school, more than 80% are working, they're fulfilling their military requirements, and they're exactly embedded in communities and in family lives that we were expecting, so that we don't have immigration and related national and border security issues. And the hard part is that there is not that kind of stipulation on either the issues, the facts, or the strategy on immigration reform in judiciary. Not a complaint, just it's an issue. And I would agree with the leader that Gang of Eight, years before that, that there's really been difficulty because they can't stipulate on some of those baselines are, which is why if we're not careful, even with 3 months, and I agree with the leader's statement, it just feels incredibly cruel if we all agree that this group did nothing wrong, and even so, one could argue were punished anyway because they don't have status. You will, you will, you will, you will, you will. They did, they did, they did. And then I would have to agree. I have no evidence that suggests that the president thought that this would be a big deal and that he intended to have this group deported. But I have continuing conversations with Homeland Security, and they will say we're not deporting, and I give them their own data. And again, I get a transition. And I realize they're understaffed. This is a huge, huge federal police force that they admit, to their credit, that they cannot administer very effectively. I mean, they have hiring problems, they have training problems, they have oversight problems, they have contract problems. And so with their own data, we point out, you are in fact detaining and deporting, and they didn't believe it until we show them their own data. Doesn't mean it gets reversed. I don't think they understood what this act would put into motion. If I did, I don't know that I could be in this institution and not be a bit angrier or disappointed. And I agree. Sure, I'm passionate. I know you hear that. I know you guys can hardly take me on the floor. I'm passionate about everything. Land of enchantment. That's how we roll. But this is an intellectual argument. These kids didn't do anything, and in fact, they did everything right. They do lose their jobs. They are losing status. They can't keep roofs over their head. They support entire families. They do have children. And can you imagine that if the 7-year-old has to go, and I did this on a radio program, a 7-year-old asked me, but my 15-year-old, my 20-year-old, my 25-year-old is going to be deported. What do you say to the 7-year-old? What do you say to the young man I met last week who, now this part I don't know if it's a fact. I overheard an aspect, so I want to tell you what I overheard and be clear that I would never misrepresent information knowingly to this committee or anybody else. What I do know is factual is that a young man said, I am responsible for my elementary and younger age siblings. I'm the breadwinner and the parent in this regard. He's in his mid-20s. As I was leaving, and he's lost his job because he lost status, and he's subject to detention and deportation. As I was leaving, somebody else told me that both his parents were killed in car accidents. So what are we saying to those children? They're going to go to foster care? And who's going to keep the lights on? It really is an emergency. And I don't think, and maybe the Hispanic caucus didn't do an effective job with the White House. That maybe the minority caucuses didn't. Maybe the American public didn't. Maybe the immigration advocates didn't. But whatever occurred, we find ourselves in an emergency. And you have the power, and I respect that. That's why I'm here this morning.
Excuse me, just a
Deal
moment,
with
please.
emergencies.
The gentlewoman is taking a phone call. She may be excused. We would appreciate her coming back. Thank you very much, and feel free to use my office. It's right there. I do care very much about this issue. I want to give everybody a chance. We need to keep moving so that we're trying to do these things.
You've been generous with your time. I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentlewoman from New York.
You know, I never get used to it, but what we really do is kick the can down the road. You've heard that since you've been here this morning. Third CR, planning another one for March. And this is the same debate, no matter how you slice it, we just don't get anything done. Is there some way that we could get ICE to suspend deporting 15-year-old kids until we can finally deal with it with legislation? Have you considered that at all?
Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Slaughter, we have asked Homeland Security. We've been unsuccessful. We've asked them to be clear about their priorities. We've asked them to be clear about when the reapplications were being submitted, how to treat those. We have not. We were clear in our requests about temporary protected status for populations. We have not received a positive response on any of these issues for Homeland Security. And in fact, the Hispanic caucus is still waiting on many written requests for answers and suggestions from the department.
Well, I'm really concerned that this, and like so many other things, that we are content to say, you know, we'll get to it. Don't you worry, we're going to fund that CHIP program. You know, it's going to be okay. I'm really depressed about my country. I'm worried about where we're standing in the world today. But the government itself here, the tax bill is, to me, was one of the worst pieces of legislation I've ever seen. Actually passed in the most abominable way it could possibly been done. A bill that I have mixed emotions about, being proud that Democrats had absolutely nothing to do with it, and then angry that we were not a part of that. So this is just more. It's just this every day. There's something else is piled on that we will take care of sometime. But when they're deporting children, and when children are committing suicide in the name in the United States, who've done nothing, absolutely nothing, it is so un-American. It's inhuman, is what it is. And if we can't put some temporary stay on it, something here. But my gosh, when you talked about, they don't even notify the parents after they pick up their child, who could be a minor child, right? 15 years old.
That's right.
And they could be in custody somewhere, but you have no clue what has happened to that child.
That's correct.
What kind of humanity is that? I see no reason why they could live with themselves for not telling them, I've taken your child away and locked them up. Well, I don't have any questions. We've asked them all as far as I'm concerned, and I agree with you. It has been, and certainly with what our leader said, it has been talked about and talked about and talked about and talked about. People are dying, and I can imagine a lot of employers wonder, every day in schools wonder where all their students went. We need to encourage education. We know that. I mean, I'm again just, I'm so sorry. Let me just say that. I feel so helpless that we who can do something, I feel that about the whole country. I feel we're all obligated to straighten this all out because we work in the place where that's being done. But there's a emperor has no clothes sort of thing going on in America today that's very troubling to me. And I think this is a large part of it because we do know that the President of the United States ran almost his entire campaign on talking about immigration and building walls and separating people, showing absolutely no compassion whatever for what, or even I think showing that he understands what he has left in his wake. So all I can do is apologize and tell you that they have all the sympathy in the world for me. And as a member of Congress, I'm ashamed that we have not done something about it. Thank you for your extraordinary hard work. And Madam Leader, I know you so well, mother, grandmother. As long as I've known you, compassion is one of the most important things for you. We all know that. If any of us have ever been sick, you're the first one to call. I mean, and I know that you feel the same way I do. There's no reason to talk anymore. If they're picking children up off the street and not even informing anybody where they have gone, there's something so inhuman about that. We're not going to act. I can tell you that. And I'll bet you this Congress ends its whole term without having anything done about this. But indeed, I will.
I may just say, I appreciate your kind words. My only purpose in being in Congress is about the children. I have my own 5 children, and it bothers me that 1 in 5 children in America lives in poverty, goes to sleep hungry at night. And what difference can we make in those lives? So anything that affects children, whether it's CHIP, whether it's DACA, and the rest, I'm like a lion.
Right.
We're protecting the children. Don't hurt the children.
Right, well, that's what we're here for. I mean, goodness, that was what I was saying a while ago. We're the only body in the country that could do anything to stop this. And even a temporary hold on ICE, they don't pick them up till we get this settled here. We'll at least put pressure on us here to get that done. Yeah.
I think there is a spirit where we can find common ground to do something. It's just about time, the most finite commodity
Yes,
and the most
okay.
dispositive of everything we
I have
do.
to?
And time makes a difference in the impact that it has in people's lives. But I have no doubt that there is a bipartisan consensus
Yep.
that can move forward on this issue, and then in the bigger discussion on comprehensive immigration reform. I have that confidence, but I make the point once again that time is important in the lives of these young people and their families and the others. Now, Mr. Colwell, Congresswoman, was disclaiming, saying these are, this is what I've heard. We had a saying in appropriations: the plural of anecdote is not data. But it is illustrative, and we do see enough evidence of the problem to say we really should. We really can make things better, and we can act upon it.
Well, Madam Leader, I have one question for you. What are the economic costs, as you see them, to this country of not passing the DREAM Act?
Well, what I said earlier, in terms of the Cato Institute, which is a respected body, but I'm sure by many of you in this room, has said that Cato has said deporting the cost of deporting and all that that implies is $50 billion. $50 billion. Excuse me, $60 billion. That's Cato's figure. The Center for American Progress found deportations would cost us $460 billion over the next decade in terms of what that means to their families, loss of productivity and the rest. And because these are contributing members of society, in the military, in the business world, in our academic communities, and our families' lives.
Paying taxes.
So that is, there are 2 measures, one from the Cato, one is just a shorter term estimate, and one is a 10-year estimate.
Well, that could put a lot of Positrack in some of the train tracks and stop these accidents that are killing people. I could start work on the infrastructure. It hasn't been that long ago that some of the water pipes going into New York City were made of brick. Most of the water systems in the United States, and we would talk about spending that kind of money to deport young people who mean us no harm.
Well, Chairwoman has a figure that corroborates, you want to?
Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, $433 billion are economic figures about what Dreamers will add to the economy, but they have to keep working
To be
in
able
order
to
to do
do
that.
that.
Right.
So it's
Over
it's
10 years.
consistent with.
Over 10 years.
That's from economists. This is consistent with the Center for American Progress, who base it on economists as well.
Thank you very much.
Gentlewoman yields
I
back
yield
her
back.
time. Thank you very much. Let me just clarify, the gentlewoman has not brought a temporary, what might be a temporary request for 3 months to the committee. She brought a bill.
Correct.
Thank you very much. The distinguished gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've had the great pleasure of getting to know the gentlelady from New Mexico over the time she's been here, and I'm sorry that she's going to go on to bigger and better things. I think if this institution is going to work the way we all want it to, it requires a degree of enthusiasm, passion mixed with engagement. And I think one of the challenges we have in this institution is sometimes our passion turns one another off instead of engaging one another. Madam Leader, I make it a point of bringing every young woman that I take down to the floor of the House. If I can find you on the floor, I'll bring her by to meet you, and you are always very gracious with your time. In fact, I had a group of, we have a few liberal individuals in our constituency back home. It's a group of young women, and they wanted to meet Bernie Sanders. They were just so disappointed. They'd been in town all week, and they hadn't gotten to meet Bernie Sanders. Well, I found them over in the Capitol Visitor Center, and you happened to walk by, and you stopped and gave them about 5 minutes of your time, and they haven't stopped talking about Nancy Pelosi since then. I haven't heard the name Bernie Sanders again since that time. They have changed their allegiance, and so because I haven't gotten a chance to get to know you as I've gotten a chance to get to know the gentlelady from New Mexico, I wanted to use this time to encourage you to use your position of influence to share not just passion, but also find a way to make that engaging. I listened to your exchange with Mr. Cole, and he talked about a legislative strategy that would provide a solution within the next 90 days. You described that as an act of cruelty.
Yes.
Well, it's hard in a place where people have different ideas. If they come to the table trying to provide solutions before deadlines, and the answer isn't, thank you for coming to the table, the answer is, that's not good enough, and in fact, it's an act of cruelty. We all get in those bad habits.
And I don't say that frivolously.
You don't say it frivolously.
I don't say it frivolously.
I
No,
know
no.
that you don't.
And I don't say it passionately. I say it objectively, intellectually, what it means in the lives of these people. But I thank you, Mr. Bowman.
I took the point. We talked about, well, when you were talking about the 60 votes in the Senate, in fact, when the chairman raised it, he had even finished his sentence about a bill never having gone to the president when you said we didn't have 60 votes, and you were absolutely right. I remember it well, and that is the only reason a bill didn't go to the president that one time. The reason a bill didn't go to the president the other times when we did have 60 votes is a different issue, but it's also the reason appropriations bills can't move through the United States. And I think about the successes that we've had together. I haven't heard them celebrated at the table. We have funded CHIP here together. We did commit ourselves to doing that. We don't have 60 votes in the Senate. We can't move that bill to the president's desk because folks don't like the offsets there. But we have gotten that done together. And
No, we have, not in a bipartisan way. The Democrats have always opposed the Walden bill that takes money from children's inoculations to pay for children's CHIP.
I take the gentlelady's point. I'd be interested in hearing that same point applied to our men and women in uniform. I know the gentlelady didn't vote on the NDAA bill, but the minority whip voted yes. The gentlelady from New Mexico voted yes. We all agreed in this chamber in a bipartisan way to fund our military at a set level. But I heard the gentlelady say here that we're not going to fund our military at that level until we agree to a one-for-one parity. And I don't understand how we've had this conversation about immigration is in shambles, we have to do so much, but let's just do this one thing on the Dreamers that we have agreement on. Let's just go ahead and move this one discrete issue. Lives are at stake was the tale here. People are losing their lives was the story from the witness table. That, I will stipulate, may be true in the Dreamer scenario. I'm certain it's true in the national security scenario.
I agree with you.
And so finding that one-to-one parity, you would say, is less of a priority, that we agreed on what the defense level should be when we authorized it through the NDAA. We've already agreed in a bipartisan way as a U.S. House how we should be funding our military, and so there's no need to wait on that deal. We can act today expeditiously because, as you said about the Dreamer issue, it's a separate, clear issue that requires immediate action. We have an emergency that was said. That's exactly true of our national security. Can we commit to that today? That in the same way that you have a legitimate case to make that let's solve the Dreamers by itself, let's do that as an individual discrete issue, that we can do that for national security too, that our troops that we promised a pay raise to a month ago but aren't going to get it if we can't get the defense across the board, can we commit to getting that done together? Because your case is persuasive, but it should be persuasive for the men and women who are serving us around the globe as well.
Is that a question? Yes. Thank you for it. Yes, we have had many conversations and been engaged in meetings with General Mattis, and our objection is not to the bill. We'd like to see what the money is for. We want it to be to modernize our forces, and everybody has enormous respect for him and his judgment, and the other the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as well as the assistant or deputy, whatever he's called, undersecretaries come to make the presentations to us. This is not about that number, although appropriators don't necessarily say the authorizing number is the appropriated number. Is that not correct, Ms.? Correct. But nonetheless, that's not the issue. Nobody's saying we want to take down the defense number. What we're saying is, in the non-defense domestic discretionary budget, a third of the budget are veterans, homeland security, the issue of anti-violence, anti-terrorism activities of the Justice Department and the State Department. All security functions are in that domestic side of it. So we need money there. But also part of our strength of our country is for us to rid the country of the opioid epidemic, to give more money to our veterans. There's a need for more funding for veterans, and that's why in the difference between the $17 billion difference are issues that I think we would all find to be bipartisan and non-controversial. Opioid epidemic, veterans issues that relate to the National Institutes of Health, which need more funding. So it isn't about whether we question the number on defense. We don't. But we're saying that our strength of our country is reflected in that domestic side as well.
I want to stipulate that everything you're saying is true, and I understood that to be exactly what you said the first time as well. My question is, we've agreed on an NDAA defense number. We haven't agreed on all of those other great bipartisan priorities that we're talking about. You've made a passionate case today that we shouldn't hold the Dreamer bill hostage until we agree on everything else that you also stipulated was incredibly important as it relates to immigration. Why is it legitimate to hold our men and women in uniform and their budget hostage until we finish everything else?
We're not holding our men and women in uniform hostage. Mr. Goodall, you probably know that.
Well,
nobody's doing that, and I don't appreciate that characterization.
Well,
but I do want to say this: we did have an agreement,
Madam Leader,
a budget
please,
agreement that said there would be parity between domestic and defense.
I did not interrupt you at all during your presentation. In the same way that you meant exactly what you said when you called it an act of cruelty to
Yes.
Mr. Cole's suggestion,
act of
I
cruelty.
mean exactly what I'm saying when I'm saying my Democratic friends are holding my national security funding hostage until they get the non-defense security bill. And everybody at this table knows it, everybody in this chamber knows it, and it's been a practice in the 7 years that I've been here as we've been negotiating these deals. So I don't I don't mean that with any disrespect. As you say, it's an intellectual issue. It's not one of passion. We have so many opportunities that we lose talking past one another. I remember when the minority whip was here, he made it very clear that 125 Republicans voted to shut the government down years ago, and it took Democrats to get it done. Now, it hadn't even been a month since every single Democrat voted against funding a CR, and Republicans kept the government open. No one believes for a moment that Democrats were trying to shut the government down when every single one voted against funding it. Nobody believes that, but we say it sometimes in the name of getting the press. We just, as Mr. Hoyer said it about Republicans years and years ago. I believe that leadership. I believe that leadership has to start at the top. And again, you are a role model to the young women in my district, and I am so grateful for what you do there. But I fear that we're at a place where we would rather fuss at each other than talk with each other. And again, my friend from New Mexico, she will never be accused of misunderstanding what her position is. Right? She is a passionate.
We all agree on that.
Passionate advocate on behalf of her constituency. Though I would dare say there's not a single issue in this Congress that I would be uncomfortable approaching her about and trying to find a way around. She's not gonna wordsmith me. She's not gonna give me the talking points. She's not gonna tell me all the reasons why I'm a scoundrel. She's gonna listen to me with an open ear, and we're gonna have a shot. I confess that I don't know, as we sit here today, where politics ends and policy begins. And as that pendulum swings back and forth, I fear it's swung too far to one end or the other. And I know of your influence. I know of the admiration that the men and women of this body carry for you. And so I just, as you have been so inspirational to the young women in my district and the young men in my district, to be perfectly candid, I would ask that you do what you can for us to reflect our shared failures and for us to celebrate our shared successes, because the American people don't know of all the ones that we have. I remember when the whip introduced a letter from Tim Walz talking about how bad the bill was. I think it's going to be in the record now. That letter absolutely came from Mr. Walz, but I remember when Mr. Walz was sitting in the chair where Ms. Lujan Grisham is, Phil Rowe was sitting in the chair where you are, and we were celebrating the biggest reform of the Veterans Administration in the history of the organization this year, this Congress. And who did that together? We did. We did. And it didn't just go to the Senate to die. It's something that makes a difference in the lives of veterans. We have so many things that we could celebrate together, and I'd be happy to be your accountability partner in that. You hold me accountable for it, and I'll hold you so. But I see the opportunities, and I see the great good that you do in so many places. I would just encourage you to help me with that quest as well.
Thank you, Mr. Woodall. Well, I don't think you really believe that we're holding the defense, our men and women hostage, any more than I think that you're holding our veterans hostage or our people with opioid addiction hostage by not supporting the funding for them on the other side of it. But I do want to tell this story because I think it's important for you all to know this, because you keep talking about the shutting down of government many years ago. It wasn't that long time ago, and many of the people who were in the lead on it are in the lead in this Congress right now. There was a budget agreement. $1 trillion, you remember this very well, Mr. Cole, $1.058 trillion was the agreement, bipartisan agreement, House and Senate and the White House, President Obama. House and Senate, $1.058 trillion. It wasn't a great number in our view, but it was a compromise, and we all agreed to it. You recall, Mr. Cole, that as we were going to mark up to that number, the House Republicans said not $1 over $988 billion, not $1 over. Your chairman, Mr. Rogers, the chairman at the time, said we cannot meet the needs of the American people at 988. He said that. But that was the number that the House Republican members insisted upon. It was a terrible number. Steny was railing against it. Everybody was railing, we're never going to vote for that. I said, don't say you're not going to vote for it. Rail against it if you will, but don't say you're not going to vote against it. You're not going to vote for it because you don't know. They insisted. House wouldn't move unless we had 988. President Obama agreed to it. The Senate Democrats agreed to it. The Senate Republicans agreed to it. And it was the number of the House Republicans. I went to Mr. Boehner and I said, as horrible and as painful as it is, as much as we don't like this number, as much as we agree with Mr. Rogers that this does not meet the needs of the American people, 200 Democrats will vote for 988. Do you know what Mr. Boehner said? I can't bring that to the floor. The only group that did not support the Republican budget number were the Republican members of the House. Your own number. So I said, well, what was that about? Were you supposed to be calling a bluff or something? What was that about? He said, I just can't bring it to the floor. I don't have the votes. I said, well, we don't like it, but we absolutely cannot shut government down, so we'll agree to the 988. The bill, they wouldn't bring it to the floor. They shut government down. Speaker was part of that. Mulvaney was part of that. Many of the leadership of this Congress were part of shutting it down. And when 17 days later, because of public pressure and billions of dollars lost to the economy, 17 days later, government was open, and Mr. Coyer mentioned how many Republicans voted to keep government closed. Many of them among the leadership in this Congress right now, one of them the head of the Office of Management and Budget. So when we talk about who agreed to what and where, I want you to be reminded, I don't know if you were even, this was not that long ago. So you're saying years ago. It wasn't that long ago. And it is so recent that many of the people who were in the lead on shutting down and keeping it shut down are in the leadership of this, on the Republican side in this Congress right now. So we cooperated on something that we really didn't even believe in. We believed in Mr. Rogers, the Republican chairman. This does not meet the needs of the American people. I even had to dampen down my own leadership and members to say, we have to vote for this. And they agreed. We cannot shut government down, and we won't shut government down. If government's shut down, it's up to the majority. You have the House, you have the Senate, and you have the White House. So that is all in your court. Very hard for us, for the reasons I mentioned, for us to vote for this continuing resolution. We were hoping that it could be a place where at least some, if you need our votes, that some of our values might be reflected. Because this issue is not even an issue, Dreamers Act. This is a value, and that's what brings us together, our values. We'll always differ on this amount or that amount or that, and have to come to compromise. But our values are who we are as a nation. And I think who we are as a nation is to welcome and bring safety to these young people. But I thank you for affording me the opportunity to say occasions when we have had to cooperate in a very, very difficult way, when you all wouldn't even agree to your own number.
I appreciate those words. I appreciate you taking my words to heart. I think we should talk more about our successes together and less about our partisan failures. I just have one question for my friend from New Mexico. I was on the border. I was in Guatemala and El Salvador and Honduras with Mr. Kennedy and Mr. O'Rourke, and it was 2014. And we were visiting with families who said, hey, Dad can't get back and forth anymore. And so we're picking up and we're moving to America because he's the breadwinner. He can't come here. We've got to go there. Those children brought here through no fault of their own as well. No protections in the Dream Act for folks who came in 2014, whose parents brought them here in 2014. President Obama thought 2007 was the right year when he did DACA. DREAM Act thinks that 2013 is the right year if it were to pass. Today, if we don't do those other things that we talk about, moving separately, getting to them some other time, getting around to that later, aren't we, whether it's immoral, whether it's cruel, whatever adjective we want to apply to it, aren't we just sentencing another generation of young children to the exact same fate that you're trying to save this generation of young people from?
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Woodall, I would say yes, which is why I don't disagree. I don't think anyone on this panel disagrees that we have an immigration reform problem, and we have a Central American problem that we're going to have to deal with. You can't get refugee or asylum or visa status. We have huge backlogs. We've got issues with families that are partially here and partially there. We have governments that even since 2014 have fallen further into hostility and corruption, which changes the strategies that we adopted from Homeland Security. And in fact, we appropriated funds to deal with some of those issues, to create stability in the Triangle region so that we could begin addressing unaccompanied minors and not continue to have one subset of problems or another, right? Most of the Dreamers, that issue, while I'm not going to say it's not that they're looking for safety and refuge in this country, a lot of it was economically produced by the fact that our country was doing so well and Mexico, in one example, was doing so poorly. That has really diminished, particularly in many of those southern border states, which aren't doing as well. And so that really shifted. But you're right. I don't believe, given the emergency and our opportunity, for folks who are embedded positively after we told them what to do about it, that we say, we were just kidding, you got to go back, and we erode those families. But I would agree that it's just as cruel and inappropriate, intellectually and passionately, I'm happy to be the passionate one, if we don't deal with these immigration issues and understand the risks that we have at all of the borders, not just the southern border, and that we really talk genuinely about human trafficking, drug trafficking, contraband. Go to the Coast Guard if you really want to have, not to the exclusion of, to the addition of, right? And we have to start thinking about our investments and our strategies and our partnerships so that we don't have huge risk with unaccompanied minors. I agree.
I tell folks back home all the easy problems have been solved, all that's left are the hard ones, and that hard ones don't get solved by smart people, they get solved by people who trust one another. We're going to miss the trust that you've developed over the time that you have been here, but we have 1 year remaining that we can maximize every
I'm going to
bit
have
of
you
that.
appointed to one of our Hispanic caucus immigration committees, so that'll happen this afternoon.
Giant
Mr.
port of
Woodall.
entry that is the Atlanta Hartsfield International Airport.
You're
And
a
Mr.
co-chair.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just correct it, in my passion, I mistakenly said that all Democrats voted against the CR. That was not accurate. 175 did, but just over a dozen voted yes, and I wanted to correct that for the record.
If I just may, as a gentleman's correcting record, let me just say, when the vote came to open up government, the Democrats voted 199. We had one out sick, 199 to open up government, while a majority of the Republicans voted to keep government shut down.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I must have been a Democrat that day. My good friend from Massachusetts is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And look, this is a sad day, I think, for this country. I mean, the third CR that we're going to consider, we're not going to provide people any certainty. I mean, this is governing by chaos. And I know it's frustrating to many of us on this side of the aisle. I'm sure it's frustrating to some of our Republican friends, but it's very frustrating to the American people kind of watching all this unfold. And, you know, there are two ways to govern. I mean, one way is through consultation and bipartisan cooperation and listening to the other side and trying to work on compromises and deals. And then there's the other way to govern, which is kind of my way or the highway, which is the way, what we're seeing here today. And I would argue with you that, you know, I'm hearing all this, you know, we're talking about the Dreamers here, and what is particularly galling to me is to hear members of the Republican side talk about process and talk about the need for more hearings and talk about the need for a more regular order, when it comes to this issue. The President of the United States ended the DACA program on September 7th. It's now December 21st. The Judiciary Committee has had lots of time to consider this issue if it were a priority. Now, we've had the Judiciary Committee come up here with a Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act because the NRA wanted it. So they've been bringing up lots of bills here. But this, for some reason, hasn't been a priority. So we have waited. And when you talk about process and more hearings, we just did what I've characterized as a tax bill scam, which is a giveaway to the biggest corporations in this country. And there wasn't a single hearing on it in the Committee of Jurisdiction. Not one. 0 hearings. And nobody complained about it. You voted it out of here, and it went onto the floor, and in a very partisan vote, you sent it to the White House. You all went to the White House and celebrated that yesterday. So don't talk about process. We've been talking about this issue. There's been a national debate on this issue for a long, long time. I mean, thousands of Dreamers have been on the Hill, visiting your offices, visiting staff members, talking about their plight, asking for help. So I don't know. I mean, if there's not a sense of urgency on this, I don't know what we can possibly do to get you to change your mind. And if you don't want this attached directly to a CR, we have the power to allow this bill to come up as a freestanding bill. You can vote up or down, whatever makes you feel comfortable. But we ought to have a debate. There ought to be some deliberation. There ought to be a more open process here. It is clear that there is bipartisan support, not only in this Congress, but throughout the country, to act on this bill. And we ought to do it. And to say, well, we'll deal with it in March, I mean, as we have heard, about 122 Dreamers are losing their status each and every day. So I'm not sure what that means when March comes around. But understand, when you lose your status, you can't work anymore. And 91% of DACA recipients are legally employed and they are paying taxes. And they are following the laws of this country. And they are doing incredible service to our community. We read in the aftermath of the terrible, storms that hit Texas about Dreamers, risking their lives to save people. They are working in our Fortune 500 companies. They are contributing in so many important ways. And, and for any of you who have met some Dreamers in your district, as I have, I mean, many of them didn't know that their status was in question. They just thought they were born here, that they came here when they were so young. I had a young woman from El Salvador who said that her family won't let her speak Spanish in their home because they didn't want anyone to think that she wasn't born here in the United States. And to this young woman, the only country she knows and the only country she loves is the United States of America. And she, is working and she is contributing to our community. And by all accounts, we should embrace her. And yet, here we are, rationalizing inaction, why we should, kick this can down the road. And I'm just saying that there is as Leader Pelosi and Ms. Lujan Grisham have pointed out, these people are feeling the consequences as we speak. And so, look, if you don't want to vote for it, then vote no. It's that simple. I mean, one of the advantages of being in control of the House is you get to schedule things. You get to control the agenda. And I think, and I get it, Trump wants, additional things, but these Dreamers are not hostages. They're not political pawns. If he wants other stuff, fine. We'll work with him in a bipartisan way to try to figure out whether we can come to some sort of accommodation. But these are real people who are suffering right now. And they're experiencing this terrible uncertainty, which I think is cruel. I don't know how else to put it. I'm not, this is just so wrong. And that it doesn't demand more urgency, that we're bringing up gun legislation takes a priority over this. You know, again, maybe the president didn't realize that we didn't have until March. And maybe the Speaker of the House, when he announced in the press conference a couple of weeks ago, oh, we have until March to deal with it, didn't realize that people are losing their status as we speak. But the reality is the reality. And all we're asking for is a vote. And I'm willing to bet that it will be a bipartisan vote, and it will pass. And I think the votes are there, obviously, in the Senate, and I believe the president will sign it. And you know, but we ought to lead. And it is just so frustrating to sit here and to listen to people rationalize why we can't do anything. We have to stop that. You know, there's lots of issues with the CR, and we could go into that forever. But on this one issue, boy, when you look at the support out there amongst Democrats and Republicans across the country, here's one moment when we could actually come together and do something. And yes, it doesn't solve everything. We got to do immigration reform. We have to do a whole bunch of other stuff. But boy, 800,000 plus people, to give them peace of mind before the holidays, you know, to say that we appreciate your service to this country and all that you have contributed, boy, that would be a magnificent signal for this Congress to send, especially after all the divisiveness that we've experienced this year. So I absolutely support your amendment, and I hope it is made in order. We will certainly offer it, and we will certainly all vote for it. But you know, but please stop rationalizing inaction, and don't use the excuse that we haven't had enough hearings. You had a tax bill up here that had no hearings, and nobody had a problem with it. I mean, we're talking about real people here that deserve our compassion, that deserve our support, and quite frankly, they're people we should be truly celebrating before they've given to this country. So with that, I thank you I yield to the gentle lady, our leader.
Well, I thank the gentleman for his very strong statement. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to have to excuse myself for what's going to be happening on the floor today, but I just want to take this to a different place. I consider our work here as like we're in a kaleidoscope. On one issue, there are certain of us in the design, and you turn it again, and it's different people. We're all a resource to each other. On some issues, we can act in a bipartisan way. Other times, it's regional. Other times, it's generational, whatever it happens to be, gender and the rest. So we have our comings together in different designs. So I don't want to have any inference to be drawn that because we have disagreement on the tax bill that we can't find disagreement on other issues. Because we have disagreement on the number that we can't find agreement on other issues. Because again, we're all a source of strength to each other for the American people, and we'll be in different designs depending on what the issue is that comes before us. So again, whatever our differences on other things, hopefully we can find common ground on this ethic of caring for people and not saying, well, you voted for this, so I'm not going to vote for this, or you voted for that, so I'm not voting for this. Again, this giant kaleidoscope that is Congress has the beauty of a mixture across the aisle, across generations, across the regionally, ethnically. In our own caucus, we have a great deal of diversity, as you do in thinking in yours. So again, I thank you for your attention to this, for the matter that so many of you are here for so long with so much to do. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your courtesy and for your candor, always that. And again, thank all of the Rules Committee members for the great service you provide to the Congress, to your staff. Thank you as well. I just think that we can turn that dial on that kaleidoscope and get to a place we're all part of a design for a small piece of the challenge that we have, that in that confidence building, we can go to the larger issue of the comprehensive immigration reform. And who knows from there, who knows where we can go together. So yes, I yield back and thank you.
If the gentlewoman would allow, one of our members does wish to engage you.
Oh, okay.
Dr. Burgess?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members can be forgiven if they don't remember the vote on the DREAM Act in 2010, because it did occur pretty late in that session. If I recall correctly, it was in the month of December. Many members had actually departed. I remember that because I was tasked to run the Republican side on the floor because everyone had left town. So it did happen, but it happened so late. And you are correct, the Senate did have a cloture vote earlier in the month of December, and where they could not get the 60 votes for cloture. And we, as Mr. Cole has pointed out, or Mr. Woodall pointed out, we bump up against that from time to time ourselves. But it's significant because then in June of 2012, when President Obama announced the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, significant in my state because 18 months later, we had, I don't remember the total number, but it was over 100,000 unaccompanied minors pouring across the lower Rio Grande Valley sector because that part of the border is very difficult to control. Even if you're dedicated to border security and dedicated to border control, the river meanders its floodplain. It is overgrown with vegetation, which the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will not let us remove, which we should, so that the border would be more controllable. And I'll tell you, I've been down there, and when these children are coming across on dusty roads, they're out of water, their clothes are not suitable for the types of terrain they've been traversing. We all saw the pictures of the children on top of the train coming from Central America through Mexico. I mean, how is that compassionate to allow that to happen? And when Governor Perry asked President Obama, come with me to the border and let's look at this, President Obama would not go to the border. He was in Dallas for a fundraiser, but he would not go to the border with the governor. And the governor had to call up the National Guard or the State Guard to do the job of defense of the border that the federal government was not doing. But I say that just to illustrate that we cannot consider these things in a vacuum. The notion of border security is not just a notion. It is something that we have to pay a great deal of attention to, or people are going to be hurt and hurt very, very badly. Before you have to leave, I do need to point out, the State Children's Health Insurance Plan, which passed through our committee, our subcommittee, our committee. We actually did not have a subcommittee hearing at Mr. Pallone's request because he wanted to delay that and have a full committee markup. You refer to that as Mr. Walden's bill. Actually, the CHIP bill was my bill as it came through committee. It got combined with the Community Health Center bill and became the Walden bill as it came to the floor. I do want to stress, I did not get what I wanted on that. I wanted a 2-year bill, and I wanted then the state of Texas to really engage me on what does the CHIP program look like going forward, because you remember when the Affordable Care Act passed, we were told we wouldn't need things like the State Children's Health Insurance Program, transitional medical assurance, because everyone's going to have the Affordable Care Act and no one would need these programs anymore. So when the Affordable Care Act passed, the funding for State Children's Health Insurance Program was increased, but only till the end of calendar year 2000, or fiscal year 2015. It was authorized to the end of fiscal year 2019, but left unfunded for those years. We did fund it in 2015 with the Medicare Access and CHIP Reauthorization Act, where it was a bipartisan bill, and we did agree. This time, the agreement that was made, if we are going to expand it to a 5-year program, with which I disagreed, but that's what the Senate wanted, that's what committee Democrats wanted. I ceded on that issue, but let us offset the cost of the bill. And I think we came up with responsible offsets. I mean, just, people object to using the Prevention and Public Health Fund.
Yes.
I would just submit, we have used those. And just to refresh the committee's memory, these are dollars that are replenished as self-affecting appropriation every 2 years, or every year rather, of $2 billion to the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services for use however that person sees fit. Occasionally, we have seen fit to direct some of those dollars to something that we thought comported with the whole idea of the Prevention and Public Health Fund, like the Cures bill a year ago, which many of us voted for. Mm-hmm. There was an offset in the Cures bill with the Prevention and Public Health Fund. Many of us on this dais voted in favor of that. It did use those dollars. So that's not a foreign concept. assessing a larger Part B premium for individuals who earn over $500,000 a year. Did not seem like a stretch to me when we were looking for offsets for that bill. We've income related the Part B premium going back to 2003. This was one more income relation of the Part B premium for people at the very upper reaches of the income scale. Not dividend income, not stock income, but ordinary income of greater than $500,000 a year. You don't get your Part B premium offset by federal tax dollars. Most of us do recall that the Part B premium only covers 25% of the actual expenditure out of Medicare Part B, which is doctors and some drugs. 75% is covered out of the federal treasury. We said to those individuals who make over $500,000 a year, you know, you're actually going to pay the premium to cover those expenses. It's still a bargain. You still cannot, I'm here to tell you, you cannot buy an Affordable Care Act policy on healthcare.gov for nearly as low a cost as even the full charge of the Part B premium. So if someone says, okay, I don't want to pay that extra Part B premium, I'll go buy in healthcare.gov, good luck. You're probably at that age paying a great deal more for your insurance. We also said that if people are covered by more than one insurance, if they're covered by Medicaid and a commercial insurance, according to law, Medicaid is the payer of last resort, but oftentimes it doesn't work out like that. And I know why that is, because it's hard to collect your money from commercial insurance. Aetna, Cigna, United, they hold on to their dollars very tightly. Most states actually give up and say, well, let's just bill Medicaid because it's easier. Those dollars come to us more quickly. It's reliable. It's a reliable income stream, and we don't collect from Aetna, Cigna, United. But in fact, we should collect those dollars first before we go to the federal taxpayer for those dollars. So these are the offsets that were included in the state children's health insurance program. They were very reasonable. They were not draconian. The opposition was simply because we didn't want, my opinion, we didn't want to get to a solution. But the solution is there. It's attainable today. Call your counterpart and minority leader over in the United States Senate and let that bill come to the floor, and that's one that will pass. And I appreciate the chairman giving me the time to engage the minority leader, and I'll stand by to hear what undoubtedly is coming back.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess, and you afford me an opportunity to make a distinction in a very clear way about why we opposed what was Burgess became Walden when it came to the floor. You are quite correct in saying that in the past there has been a call on some of the prevention funds, but that was the prevention funds that are additional. We had worked with Mr. Boehner. As you know, we had an historic agreement when we did the Doc Fix and SCHIP and the community health centers and all the rest a few years ago. That was a big accomplishment. And some funds were taken, over time, some funds have been taken from the additional funding that you correctly say comes into account. What we're concerned about in the Walden/Burgess bill, let's put it on Walden, is that it went to the base. It went to the basic money of the prevention fund. And we did not think that that should be a place where children had to take money from children's inoculation, fighting lead poisoning, those kinds of things should pay for that. Mind you, not to get back to former issues, we have had, you know, nearly $1.5 trillion tax break for corporate America, unpaid for and permanent. We're talking here about 5 years. I agree with you. It should be paid for. It should be offset. But we did not like those offsets. Now, maybe
if I may, it's the same budgetary offset that was used in the Cures bill. And many people on this dais voted in favor of the Cures bill on both sides of the
and
dais.
I did too. But now let me just say this. We have a disagreement there. But let me just also say this. In terms of the Medicare piece, we do not want to, I appreciate, and I think I subscribe to what you said. Medicare has some means testing in it, but to the extent that...
No, income relating, we don't use the words means and testing together in a sentence.
Income related, I agree with what you're saying. Income related, well, there are assets that people have that are not their income, so that might be part of it too. But anyway, the point being that we don't want to diminish the constituency from it. The health pool that is there. So people who are healthier and this or that find it cheaper to go shopping elsewhere. We want to keep them in Medicare, and that was part of that. But then one other point that you made on the Medicare, on the children's health side of it, no, we are committed to this. It was the first bill we passed when we had the majority. First bill that we sent to the president was the S-chip. First bill we sent to the president that passed the Congress. Well, we passed other bills in the House when we had our first 100 hours, but the first bill that passed the whole Congress was, you and I call it S-chip. We go back, but the chip bill. So that was in the beginning of '09, and we had a full commitment to that bill. Now, when you talk about we don't want it to happen, no, this is a high priority. It was the first bill that we sent to the president. But I do think you would take heart in the fact that there is bipartisan conversation that is almost there for agreed-upon offsets in a bipartisan way. We had hoped that that would be what would be the basis for the funding in this bill, but it is not. But it is well down the road in good faith with the Speaker's office, with the House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans, and the White House on that score.
So what I'm hearing you saying is that you will support the S-chip provision in the continuing resolution because we should be able to get this worked out by January 19th of 2018.
No, I'm saying you don't have the right offset in the bill, but we do agree that it's important to do, Chip.
Chairman, I'll just point out it's an offset we've all agreed to use before, many members on this dais on both sides.
It's a different offset. But Mr. Burgess, thank you for your enthusiasm for Chip and for this, I think, very productive exchange that we're having now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield.
Ms. Pelosi, thank you very much for your time. As you know, this committee has allowed you to engage us, and I think you gave us a fair opportunity, although all the members would have wished that our time would have been longer. Thank you very much. I know you've got to go. We appreciate your presence.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Merry Christmas to Paul.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. You've had your fun?
That's another way to describe this. Yes, sir, I did.
Are you telling me you're leaving also because the committee has not finished engaging you?
I can stay here
Okay.
as
All right.
long
Let's
as
see
you'll
what we've
have
got.
me.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely, sir.
Judge Hastings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We've been here a very long time, and I
Yes,
don't
sir.
want to prolong it. I do want to point out that by blocking the amendment that's offered by Ms. Lujan Gresham, in many respects, we're just offering a cold shoulder to the young people that many of us have seen demonstrating here at the Capitol, certainly in an intense way for the last 2 weeks. Mr. Chairman, we all know that this continuing resolution is the last train before the end of the year. You've already given a big-time Christmas present to billionaires and corporations. And can't you also give a gift to the dreamers and to the majority of this House who recognize this as an urgent or priority? It's been a record-breaking year for closed rules. Most of my constituents don't even know what closed rules are. But in this particular session of Congress, we've had 57 completely closed rules. That's twice the number that Democrats had when we were in the majority. You don't have to end on a record-breaking closed rule. You can make Ms. Lujan Grisham's amendment in order and give the dreamers a fair chance on the floor of the House. And I do believe that most of us know that it would pass. We are leaving a number of things on the table. Long-term flood insurance, Perkins loans. There's been discussion about funding to address the opioid epidemic, legislation to help save failing pension funds. That's something particularly critical to people in our country. We're leaving long-term bipartisan reauthorization of CHIP and community health centers out in the lurch, and long-term FISA. I was prepared yesterday. I thought we were meeting at 4 o'clock on yesterday on FISA. I was supposed to handle the bill with the 702 reauthorization. Now that isn't coming up. We are not dealing with raising the defense and non-defense spending caps. And we are leaving Medicare extension on the table as well. President Donald John Trump just tweeted, House Democrats want a shutdown for the holidays in order to distract from the very popular just passed tax cuts. House Republicans, don't let this happen. Pass the CR today and keep our government open. Mr. Woodall, my dear friend, pointed out how sometimes our passion and our discussions cause us to form camps and not form agreements. It's the kind of statement that just came from the president. There's no Democrat I know that wants the government to shut down. There's no Republican that I know that wants the government to shut down. We have fundamental disagreements on some policy matters, and in past situations, that was also the case. But I would remind Donald Trump that his tax measure that you all celebrated yesterday, if any of the polls are to be believed, is not particularly popular in this country. It would be my hope and yours that it would become popular, but at the moment it is not. And the president needs to put his Twitter account under his pillow and sleep on it rather than continue to divide this country the way that he has. We're here about serious matters, the continuing resolution of what is needed to keep this government open that should have been handled long before now, and all we're asking is for the dreamers. I may offer an amendment, Mr. Chairman, if Ms. Grisham's, Lujan's amendment is not offered, and that is to, at the very least, provide temporary protected status to those who are in the dreamer status under the national laws of this country, the same as we have for Haitians and Hondurans and Nicaraguans. We could at least until March, if that's when we claim we're going to have it, at least not deport any of these young people and not allow them to be in the lurch losing their status. It's a disgusting situation that we find ourselves in, but rather than go on, Mr. Chairman, I'll leave it at that and not cause you all to have to listen to me. I am pretty damn mad about what we are doing to the dreamers.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. We appreciate your help. The gentleman, distinguished gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Byrne, I would like to personally apologize to the gentleman. I did make a quick decision, and I did ask that the minority leader stay for Dr. Burgess. That was not meant against you. I know you wanted time, but in respect for the balance, I did what I did, and so I offer my apology to the distinguished gentleman. Gentleman's recognized.
Well, Mr. Chairman, the questions I have are for the two people who are sitting in the chairs that are empty there. I know that they didn't leave and do it on a personal basis. I don't take it personally. I do think it's a sign of disrespect to the committee. They come here, they seek for us to listen to them. I patiently listened to them, and they left. So I don't get to ask.
Gentleman's entitled to his opinion. I appreciate that.
I did not go to the White House yesterday. I stayed to meet with a Democratic member of the House with whom I am working very closely on an issue that's extremely important to everybody in the House. So I try to work with Democrats every chance I can, and I'm disappointed your leadership didn't stay, to say that. I'm further disappointed that the minority leader refused to go to the White House and meet with the president about another issue that's extremely important to all of us. I mean, I wasn't invited by President Obama very many times to go to the White House, but when he invited me to come, I went. He and I have pretty strong disagreements, Mr. Chairman. But when the President of the United States calls you to come to the White House, you go. And particularly when it's on a matter of extreme importance, like funding the government of the United States. I do think Ms. Pelosi is holding the defense of the United States hostage. I do believe that we are endangering the lives of young men and women that wear our uniform all over the world. We're probably going to pass a CR and get out of here today or tomorrow. And we'll all go home to nice homes and our families. And those young people are out there, God knows, all sorts of places, including South Korea, and we have not properly provided for them. And I just got to tell you, I'm not going to feel too good at Christmas about that. I think that is a dereliction of duty of the highest order, and it's a dereliction of duty because we've had a cynical, manipulative attempt to hold up funding the defense to get an agreement on non-defense matters. That's what it is. That's why we didn't show up at the White House for the budget meeting. That's why we won't engage in good faith discussions with the Speaker about getting budget caps. And that's why we've endangered those young men and women. That's what's happened. Now, they're not here to respond to me. I'm sorry. I'd love for them to respond to me, but that's what we've done. And I'm going to have to make a hard decision myself about whether I'm going to vote for a CR to keep the government open when I know that it endangers our men and women in uniform. So if I vote for the CR, it's because I believe we got to keep the government open. We got to move forward. If the members on the other side don't want to do that, you don't want to keep the government open, that's your decision. To the gentlewoman from New Mexico, my president, the leader of my party, wants us to consider a DACA fix. I'm going to honor his request. I have some grave concerns about it, but I'm going to honor his request. And if you'll check with some of your colleagues about me, I'm going to do so in a good faith way. I don't play games with people. I'm going to listen. I've had a group of pastors come by to see me in my district. They want me to meet with some dreamers in my district. I'm going to do that. I'm going to keep open ears, open eyes, open heart. I'm going to reach across the aisle as hard as I possibly can on that issue. I'm assuring you of that. I wish that I felt y'all were reaching back. I don't feel that because there are other issues here that are attached to the Dreamer issue that somehow we're saying we can't talk about those. Well, you don't get to pick the contours of the debate here. You got to accept the contours that they give us. I don't always like the contours of the debate here. There are many times I have to agree to things that I don't like to get other things. That's the way it works. But if we're going to have a discussion about Dreamers, then we need to have a discussion about border security. So if you want that discussion and you want it in good faith, in return in good faith, discuss with us border security. Don't say we're only going to debate Dreamers. If you want us to debate Dreamers, you wanted to do it in good faith, then you have got to do the same thing about border security. I think there's a lot of common ground on border security if we'll have the discussion. But if you want us to come to an agreement on your issue, you have to come to an agreement with us on our issue. Does that seem like a fair way to do this?
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Byrne, I absolutely accept your offer to continue to work with us and reach across the aisle. I may disagree with you about which pieces are left for whom in this body to address and in what priority, including defense. And in fact, without making a complaint, just in observation, because things happen, I was part of the original meetings with the Speaker on a task force, as were my colleagues and counterparts in the Senate, with their leadership. And immediately after, we were disinvited to those efforts. I can't tell you why. I can't tell you whether that was meant to be negative or just strategic to get to a place where we could start to reach across the aisle so we know who's where in the Republican.
But my question was pretty simple.
Sorry.
Is it fair for us to talk about border security in the same discussions we're talking about Dreamers?
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Byrne, I apologize that I was so long-winded, and I thought I'd answered that, yes, but we have to be invited to that conversation. And in fact, we have been diligently now, working in many bipartisan groups, specifically on border security. However, it's not done. Dreamers are losing status and are being harmed, and dreamers, in the context of being in this country today, aren't a border security issue. They're here. These don't have to be always mutually exclusive. I agree with you. But in this context, in this emergency, at the end of the year, on a CR, we have an opportunity. With our positions of great power come great responsibility, and I do, Mr. Byrne, accept your offer.
Well, I'm looking forward to that discussion, because I don't think we're going to get a bill that helps the Dreamers unless we get something that deals serious fashion with border security. That's a reality. I get lots of speeches around here from people about the realities of the things we have to deal with. That's just a reality. So if you want a fix on Dreamers, you need to come to the table seriously in good faith to talk about border security. And I'm willing to listen with open ears, open eyes, open heart about the whole thing. But I'm not going to be segmented about it by saying we've got to just do Dreamers and not talk about the rest of it and get something worked out there. And I'm sorry you had to listen to my tirade earlier, because it's not your fault. You've been here and you've been very patient about listening and responding to our questions, and I do appreciate that about you. I think you've handled yourself in an exemplary fashion. It's impressed me. I'm sorry your leadership didn't stay so that they could have impressed me in the same way, and I yield back.
Jim yields back to time.
Surprise my staff too, sir.
Well, we're delighted that you're here. Look, we're moving up and down this panel, and you've decided to stay, and I respect and appreciate that. I expect it, but I still appreciate it.
Certainly.
I have a question. You talk about trying to be inclusive, and listening to people, including people. You want to be included. How about Carlos Capello joining your organization when he was denied?
Mr. Chairman, I want to report that I voted each and every time for Mr. Cabello to join the caucus, and he's aware of that. And while I can't always, and I bet you feel the same way, take responsibility for the actions of every single member on either side of the aisle, I bet you have moments, I hope I'm not overstepping my appropriateness here, but I bet you have those moments with both sides just chairing this committee. It's an interesting and difficult job. I think that
No, we're angels up here. The chairman handles this both well on both sides. Come on, you've been here a long time this morning.
I would like to brag
Now I'm the
on-
issue.
Yeah, I'm going to brag on Mr. Curbelo. In spite of that issue, where there's still disagreement about how well that would work,
You get my point.
I do, but-
Inclusiveness goes,
Right.
but
It
goes
does.
two
But
ways.
we're
And
still
one of
working
my-
together.
One of my best friends, Carlos Cabela, can't even be a part of a caucus which he's not been questioned that he is Hispanic either. And he can't even become a member of the caucus.
I assure you that was not the case. I mean, the issue at hand. Fair enough, but that
I
was
don't
not the
doubt
issue.
that. So there's something deeper.
But we are working together, and I have an opportunity to brag on a colleague, and I know that you're busy and we don't have enough time, but I want to do that. Mr. Curbelo has not stopped working to protect Dreamers. And despite disagreements about other issues, to his credit and to ours, and the entire caucus and myself, his ideas and his stalwart support here have not gone unnoticed, I hope, by both chambers and by many members of our great body. So thank you for raising that.
All I'm saying is, this inclusiveness goes a couple different ways, and we can't always get there. And you get my point, and I accept yours also. Mr. Cabela is a dear member of our conference and as a member of this body, and we're pleased to have him. The gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you. I would also point out that, I arrived here this morning, I think at 8:03, and Mrs. Pelosi was already in the chair, and by my reckoning, she was willing to spend, and did spend, about 2.5 hours with us today. I think our friends on both sides, particularly on your side, had a number of questions for her. But I think the dedication of 2.5 hours to our committee shows the esteem in which she holds our committee and the seriousness. That's longer than any other witness I can recall that has spent before this committee.
Well, Mr. Walden spent about 28 hours.
Who did?
Mr. Walden.
Okay, so Mr. Walden is in the rarefied stratus with Mrs. Pelosi then, for having spent a good deal of time with this committee. I have not, has Paul Ryan as a speaker been here? I don't know. But we would certainly love to see Mr. McCarthy and Mr. Ryan if they choose to join us. And I don't think you'd hear any complaints from our side if they were only here for 2.5 hours. I think we would be grateful for that time.
Why would we need to do that when you've got me?
Well, we appreciate your time on this committee as well, Mr. Chairman. But I would just, again, indicate that were Mr. McCarthy or Mr. Ryan to come, we would certainly be respectful of their time. And if they were with us for 2 hours or 2.5 hours, we would consider that a great sign of respect for our committee.
Well, they do, let me assure you, they have great respect for this committee. And they have appointed, as Mrs. Pelosi has, each of you, we have made sure that our committee, to a person, is not only the finest in our conference, but here of equal value to each other, and we do appreciate that. But this is a representative of our party right here that you see. And we speak as, not as one voice, but we speak as one team. So I know that you engage us every day, and that is literally, I consider the strength of this team, not just one person or the other.
Earlier I want to address something when Mr. Burns said that somehow Mrs. Pelosi or the Democrats are holding something hostage. One has to recognize that the Democrats in Congress have no ability to hold anything hostage. We're the minority here. We're trying to make motions. They will likely be outvoted. The majority party is responsible for not
Will the gentleman yield?
passing things on the floor. I'm not.
Will the
finished
gentleman
yet.
yield?
I'm not finished yet.
Will the gentleman yield after he's finished?
Well, I'll be happy to yield in a bit of. Yeah,
Thank
I'll be
you.
happy to give you some of my time later. So let me start again here. The gentleman, Mr. Byrne, had indicated that somehow Mrs. Pelosi or the Democrats are holding something hostage. The Democrats have no ability to hold anything hostage. The Republicans not only have a majority on the floor, but actually control the agenda of what we vote on. And if the Democrats had a say in that, we would certainly schedule for immediate votes, items like child health insurance program, the DREAM Act, and I don't even think we would be talking about a shutdown of government if the Democrats were in charge. But again, the Democrats have no ability here to schedule anything for the floor, despite our best efforts. And if there's anybody who is holding government hostage, it is your fellow Republicans, Mr. Chairman, who are in control of what we vote on and control the floor. I'm happy to yield to the gentleman from Alabama.
I appreciate the gentleman doing so. As Mr. Cole regularly tells us, in order to get one of these things done, you have to have a bipartisan agreement because you have to have Democrats in the Senate to agree to it. Am I wrong about that, Mr. Cole?
Gentleman is correct.
Well, without further,
So
let me.
that means you can hold it hostage.
Well,
and
reclaim
you
my
have.
time. The gentleman did not say the Senate is holding it hostage. The gentleman said Mrs. Pelosi is holding it hostage. She's not a senator, last
I'm
I heard,
informed
although
that
she'd
she's
make
part
a
of
darn
those
fine one.
discussions.
Well, she'd make a darn fine senator. Maybe we can agree on that. But the issue is, if the gentleman has an issue, it's with the United States Senate. It's not with Mrs. Pelosi
Would
or
the
the House
gentleman yield just for a
Democrats.
moment, please?
Happy to yield.
We are engaging in what is great for all of us. Does the gentleman have a question for our witness? Because if we do not, I'm going to excuse the witness.
Yeah, I think that one thing that I think the committee can be better educated on, because there seems to be some misunderstanding, is this whole issue of deferred action not expiring till March. It is already expiring every day for over 100 Dreamers. And I wanted to, and that means that there are 100 people able to work legally today that are not able to work legally tomorrow. The Republicans are creating more illegal immigrants every day by failing to act on this. I just want to make that clear. And that will continue until Congress addresses the DREAM Act. That is not Democrats, that is Republicans that are creating more people that are here illegally every day. And I want to ask Ms. Lujan Grisham to explain how that works. Why are these expiring, and why is there no other status for them? What becomes of these Dreamers that status expires, and they're not waiting until March? their status expires today, and I wanted you to clarify for the committee why that's so urgent.
Right. Mr. Chairman, Congressman Polis, I appreciate that. So you're correct. It's 122 that lose their status every day. By March, we'll have 4,500 because in the deferred action eligibility requirements, you have to renew your application based on the date of original application. So in this process, as those original dates of application expire and you must reapply, there's nothing to reapply to. There's also a notion, I think, by some in Congress that and again, I don't want this to be the case. I'm here imploring that we use this vehicle to protect Dreamers today so that we can deal with the more complicated issues, and they are complicated. I don't want to diminish or pretend that they aren't. And I'm grateful for the invitation I've had by many caucuses, Problem Solvers, the Tuesday Group, Main Street, and so many others to talk about border security and identify issues that we think both sides can move forward and agree on. But here, there is nothing you could return to in March. So some have even said, not only do we understand that we're risking the 4,500, add to that the thousands of applications by the original renewal date, which was when October 5th, that were postmarked on time but not delivered on time, and the Homeland Security made a unilateral decision, it's not standard in the administrative process, to also deny those. You now have thousands of Dreamers who cannot work and who are at significant risk. And in March, if God forbid I lose this appeal to you on my amendment today, and something doesn't occur shortly thereafter, there are some who say, well, the president could just reinstate DACA. There's nothing to reinstate. There would be total chaos in trying to figure out no program to try to reapply to, and the fact that there'd be no status to protect the folks in this executive order that's from a prior administration that's been rescinded. So we have to do something. It does quite literally require an act of Congress. And I'm hoping that your question and my answers and my effort today moves the committee to join me in approving my amendment today. Thank you.
And I thank the gentlelady. And so, I want to make sure, again, the committee knows there is no March deadline. The deadline has passed for over 100 people every day. That's why you see this sense of urgency. It's why Democrats have no interest in putting this off till January. We expect to stay here through Christmas, through New Year's to get this done. There are bipartisan proposals on border security, and there are some that our colleagues, Mr. Hurd, have worked on, that as Problem Solvers have worked on. Those are very close to the finish line. I think we can vote on them this week and pass them along with the DREAM Act. So we are ready to go. And again, if there is anybody who is standing in the way, it is not the Republican rank and file. It is simply Republican leadership. The votes are there. This is ready to occur. President Trump has indicated he would sign it. And the deadline has passed. So we are, of course, ready to stay here and work rather than allow the status to lapse for these de facto Americans. As you know, Mr. Chairman, I've had the opportunity to offer the DREAM Act every time we've had a continuing resolution. We haven't prevailed yet in getting it ruled in order. This time I hope we will. What an impact and message that would make on the eve of Christmas to be able to create that certainty for the 1.5 million Dreamers that just want to be able to contribute to our country to make it even greater. So I strongly urge my colleagues to support the DREAM Act amendment. Doesn't mean you have to support it on the floor. Some of you might vote yes, some of you might vote no. But it is a debate we need to have. It will ensure Democratic support for the rule. It will ensure Democratic support for the continuing resolution. Simply let us have our vote on the DREAM Act so that we can go home knowing that we did what we needed to for our friends and our neighbors and constituents of mine like Brittany and Alex and Jessica and Jose and so many others that I've come to know who know that we are here working for them and can advance the issue simply by allowing the House to debate and vote on a bill that will almost certainly pass the DREAM Act. I'm happy to yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. The gentlelady has been a very patient and very capable witness, and we thank you for being here today, and you've enlightened us all. It's always a pleasure to see my friend. And unless there are other questions from anybody on the panel, the gentlelady's excused. Thank you again for this much of your time.
You're welcome. Thank you for your courtesies today. I appreciate the entire committee's participation in the dialogue.
I was advised when the chairman left the chair that he was in consultation as to exactly what's happening next. So, I didn't realize, I'm sorry, I should have been paying attention. Mr. Weber, you've been a very patient person as well. I hope you found it at least entertaining. But please come to the dais for your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the committee, all of you. And I want to say that regarding the disaster relief supplemental, my district in Texas, some of you will know, is ground zero for Harvey flooding. I'm the first 3 coastal counties from Louisiana: Jefferson County, Galveston County, the southern half of Brazoria County. And if memory serves me correct, and then of course Houston is just north of me, Harris County. If memory serves, some 300,000 homes were flooded. I think 500,000 cars flooded, a lot of people out of their homes. I have personally experienced in my own district, by traveling back and forth, all of the devastation and the heartbreak and the just unbelievable suffering. On Facebook, as recent as about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, a lady said reached out to me for help. She's living in her car. We have people living in tents, people living in garages, people living in houses that have not been had the sheetrock taken out. There's still wet carpet. There's still flooded walls. Mold is undoubtedly growing. The lady in the car, thank God, I was able to finally get on Facebook a couple of days later and got back with her. And then after another 3 or 4 days, she responded to me back that she'd gotten some help from her church and she was out of her car. So what I'm describing is the suffering is immense. We have paid very, very close attention to the bill, the supplemental appropriations bill for disaster relief, and we appreciate all the help that the leadership has given us. We expect to have bipartisan support on both sides, Mr. Chairman. We've been in multiple meetings. We have met with the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, and his staff over a lot of issues that the state's dealing with and how they're viewing. You know, you have to remember they are eyes and boots on the ground. My chief of staff has been a stalwart in this endeavor. She's been poring over the supplemental. She's been looking at it left and right, upside down, sideways, every way you can imagine. We're trying to make sure Texas, being absolutely the largest land mass and the most people affected, that we're adequately covered in this supplemental bill. So, Mr. Chairman, I would offer that I have an amendment at the desk.
Mr. Weber, thank you very much. By the way, I'd like to add to your testimony that the gentlewoman from Dallas, Texas, former mayor of Irving, Texas, Beth Van Dyne, who is the HUD representative for 6-state region, is in attendance with us today and has spent a good bit of time this week on a bipartisan basis dealing with members of Congress, talking about the actions of the administration as it dealt with her, so to speak, into the business in this disaster fund. And I want to thank Beth for being here. Mayor, thank you for taking time to join us today. Sure. Ms. Weber, we're delighted that you're here. The gentleman is bringing ideas that are not only instructive but reminders to us about how difficult the issues are of dealing with not only your home counties, but also the tremendous storm. And I have a concern. I am concerned, and I said this a long time ago, as the water dries up, so do people's boats. And it's been a lesson for a number of people because of the enormity of this whole battle. one of my dear friends in Congress, Jennifer Gonzalez, is from Puerto Rico, and there have been a lot said even this morning about how we're not doing the right things. Well, there are hundreds of people from New York alone that are down in the islands. The islands themselves present their own problems, the terrain, the infrastructure, the safety issues that go along with this. I want to thank you for standing up. I've watched you now for since the day the storm came ashore. Before that, your leadership, your common sense, your ability to try and sift through data and information, the opportunity for you to engage Beth Van Dyne and the departments of the federal government. I want you to know that we do care about Texas. We do care about you. The gentleman, Mr. Hastings, who sits on this committee, offers opportunities for us to understand the enormous impact on his state, too. I think what has happened with this supplemental, so to speak, this disaster issue is most instructive to us all, and I want to thank you for your professionalism in representing not only your people, but the state of Texas for some common sense ideas. I want to thank you for being here. I also want to know that we have Mr. Polis, who is, I'm going to consider being on this panel as we work through. Does anybody have any questions? Excuse me. Mr. Polis, the question I'd have for you is, has anybody from any of these groups that are working engaged you yet on your ideas, or is your legislation just the DREAM Act and that's where you are? Are you open to working with the other groups, and have they engaged you?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
There's a working group. There are several working groups. Have they engaged you?
I'm in one in particular called Problem Solvers. That's a bipartisan working group, yes.
How's that going?
Good. I think there's a couple products that, as I said, I think would be ready to vote on within a few days. There's legislative language being drafted. There's a couple projects. One I know is one that Mr. Hurd is working on with Mr. Aguilar. The other one is the Problem Solvers proposal. I would be optimistic that we would be able to pass them this week.
So do you consider that those would be people in the room, bipartisan?
Yes.
Of a closer to a sense of the problem and why we need to address it, and they're trying to work this through even themselves?
But yes, I think that everybody who chooses to be in those rooms is committed to solving the problem. That's correct.
And it's a big issue.
It's an enormous issue, absolutely.
Enormous issue, and enormously important.
Yes.
By the way, the gentleman, Mr. Newhouse, may or may not tell you, but as I walked in my office a few minutes ago, he asked me, may we bring some dreamers in that I want to have a meeting with? I said, absolutely, bring them on into the chairman's office. So he may or may not tell the story, but had an opportunity to have 8 or 9 people from his home district engage him at the Rules Committee, as we've had before when you brought people up here. I thought it was instructive that we did the same. It is bipartisan. Thank you very much for my questions, both of you, the gentleman, Chairman Cole.
I have no questions, other than I just want to echo your sentiments, Mr. Chairman, about my friend from Texas and how he's represented his people at a very difficult time. A lot of us have gone through these things. We certainly had a lot of tornadoes in my district. When you guys deal with hurricanes, we just call it rain in Oklahoma, because by the time it gets to us, that's about all it is. So you have to deal with the brunt of it. But I know we've sent from our state some disaster teams down and tried to assist. And I must assure you, every time we've ever had any problem, the kind of help we've gotten from Texas, both philanthropic and professional, has just been absolutely first rate. So we all grieve for you and every other ones of the victims, whether they're in Texas or Florida or Louisiana or Puerto Rico or the Virgin Islands. And you had a lot to do with changing the response. It's worth noting, Mr. Chairman, and I say this is no criticism of anybody, because it's very difficult
gauge, the sweep of response to damage. It takes time, literally, to know how much you've lost. And so we had a recommendation from the administration that, quite frankly, a lot of our members from the affected areas who were maybe more on top of this situation knew not to be adequate. And as an appropriator, I had the opportunity to interact with quite a few members from the district, and frankly, from people not in the affected areas. We forget about how many children get displaced in these kinds of situations, and we've now within this bill have money set aside to help school districts that are receiving children, so that these were things they could not possibly predict and prepare for. So we want to help them, but that package moved up pretty dramatically, and it was my friend and many others from Texas and Florida and the affected regions that helped educate the Appropriations Committee about what the scale of the needs were. So I think the package that we have now, assuming it's approved by Congress, is somewhere in the neighborhood of $81 billion, well above the $44 billion the administration requested. And I suspect there'll be additional help along the way. I'm actually very proud of Congress. I've been, as my friend pointed out in his testimony, very bipartisan in trying to work together and come together. I think there's a real coalition of folks that understand these are very challenging situations, and they're going to be there regardless of anything, and to make sure that people, Americans in trouble, and through no fault of their own, get the kind of help that they deserve, and the government has, in my view, an obligation to provide. But again, my friends played a big role in that and in educating us, and I just wanted to personally thank him for that.
Well, I appreciate that. Do all the members have a copy of the amendment?
We have 5 amendments.
You have 5 amendments?
In fact, we do, sir.
Okay. At this time, would you like me to go through with those amendments, Chairman?
Whatever, I thought the gentleman was through this testimony.
No, let me do that. I'm just laying out the case for how important it is and the need. And Mr. Cole is correct. We are grateful that the sum was moved up from 44 billion to 81. But from a Texas standpoint, there's some things that help us operate. You have to remember we're a huge district, a huge state, huge area. There's a lot of energy. There's a lot of water. There's a lot of resources there. Some may not know that Beaumont actually is the Port of Beaumont is the largest mover of military personnel and equipment in the entire country. And I have 5 ports, more than any other member of Congress. Some have 4, but we have 5 in District 14. And so it has a national security nexus, if you will, and getting that dredged out, for example. I'm sure you've heard from Chairman McCall, in his district, where you've got a Cypress Creek reservoir need over there next to where the Army Corps of Engineers currently has Barker Creek and Addicks Dam. So there's a lot of need there. Here's my amendments. The current language in the bill, as we've read through it, we've been in close contact with the governor's office, and they're tracking this almost night and day because they know how it affects the state and how it affects the infrastructure and even the prospect of future flooding there and future lives lost, future properties lost. Amendment number 3, as you see there, which shows me and McCall and Cuellar on it, excludes reservoirs from projects requiring 100% local operation and maintenance funding. Now, what that means is, again, we go back to that reservoir that would be in Congressman McCall's district alongside of Addicks and Barker Dam, where the Army Corps of Engineers literally had to release water after the flooding from Harvey was almost done. And they had to release water down on homes with little and no notice in many instances. And it flooded people out and flooded businesses out where they had never, ever experienced a flood in Houston in the last 40 or 50 years. So what we want to be sure is we get that project, those reservoirs, in the language that says if the Army Corps is going to manage a reservoir, if the Army Corps is going to have another one in that Houston area, which is huge, then they ought to be responsible for the upkeep, operation, maintenance. That's what that amendment does, quite frankly. And I can stop there, Chairman, if there's questions about that amendment, or I can go to amendment number 4.
Gentleman will proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You look at amendment number 4, it adds navigation districts to eligible projects, also language in the bill. Most people do not know that the Sabine-Neches Waterway, which is the waterway between Louisiana and Texas, my far eastern boundary, Texas, eastern border with Louisiana, is the second largest waterway, longest waterway in the Gulf Coast, second only to the Mississippi River. And just from an economic standpoint, the Sabine-Neches waterway is responsible for 90 to 95% of the LNG exports in this country. So it is huge. It is also obviously the feed to the Gulf for the Port of Beaumont, Port of Port Arthur, that actually lets our military personnel and our equipment get out. And with all that you're hearing over with North Korea, the saber rattling, and over in Iran and around the world, I think it's critical that this is added, that navigation districts, which Sabine-Neches Navigation District manages the Sabine-Neches waterway, would be added to that project so that they too, from a national security standpoint, would be included. That's our number 4 amendment. And then number 5, I'm gonna strike number 5 and number 6. Okay, I'm not gonna offer those, so I'm gonna withdraw those. Number 7 amendment, also McCall, Cuellar, Weber, requires a deadline of 24 months for study completion under the Corps of Engineers. What we're saying is, with this kind of national security nexus, with this kind of energy nexus, 60% of the nation's jet fuel is produced in my district. You add the Port of Houston to that, and it's almost 85%. Almost 20% of the nation's gasoline east of the Rockies. 14th District of Texas, my district. You add Port of Houston, the districts north of me, it's over 80% of the nation's gasoline. So it's huge on energy, and we're saying to the Corps of Engineers, these kinds of projects, flood mitigation, those that affect that many lives, that many families, that many homes, that many businesses, that many jobs, that much national security, need to be a priority. And we're saying, look, this practice of having a study for 3, 4, 5 years or longer is unacceptable. In these instances, we want them to make those studies a priority and expedite with a 24-month max. Those, in essence, are my 3 amendments, and I'm open for questions, and I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman.
Congressman Weber, thank you very much. These make sense. I'm a little surprised that our Appropriations Committee did not know or saw fit to do these, so we'll, I'm sure, engage in that at some point. Not taking advantage of anybody, but these seem like enormous issues, especially when you consider Fort Hood, Texas, Bliss, out in El Paso, is the armor that the United States Army needs that goes via train to the 14th District of Texas, then gets on ships to head out so that our men and women are on the other end. This is tremendously important. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being here. And I think I join with everybody in saying that our thoughts are with your constituencies and
Thank you.
a lot of people in Texas, and a lot of people have been hit by natural disasters all over our country. It's really quite sad, and I think we need to step up and do everything we can. And I mean, I'm not an expert on, you know, your district and your state better than I do, and I think these seem reasonable to me, and I hope they're made in order. But I have this feeling that they won't be. And I'm just going to throw this out there. I don't want to put you on the spot. But you know, I think one of the ways to kind of force this issue would be to vote against the rule, so that they would maybe come back and maybe think differently about making these amendments in order. I just throw that out there because I think I mean, you're in a difficult situation. These guys are in the majority, but I just think that may be the only way to force votes on these things, and we'll do our part in this committee on our side to try to make them order. But I throw that out there for.
And I appreciate that, Mr. McGovern. Does that mean you'll vote for the rule in order to help this if we get the amendment on it?
Well, you know what? You know, maybe.
Yeah, good.
But the deal is, you guys control the votes here, and I can tell you with pretty much certainty that every Democrat's going to vote no. So we always come back here and put your things in. Even if we voted no, you'd have your amendments in order. So.
Well, I do want to draw attention. I thank you for the questions and the comments. I do want to draw attention to just how important this is and how it would improve the bill. And to our great appropriators and to our great staff, especially my chief, she has done a yeoman's job of working through this. It's very, very complicated, and these are unprecedented times, and there's a lot of people suffering out there. And what we're trying to do is say, look, we want to mitigate this for the the future going forward, because it's not a question of if Texas or any other states, for that matter, with these kinds of projects gets a hurricane. It's simply a matter of when.
I appreciate that, and if the shoes were on a different, I mean, I would be doing everything I possibly could for my district, and hoping that people would join with me, and I'm very, very sympathetic, so.
Thank you.
Lots of luck. I yield back.
And I appreciate the gentleman's sincere appreciation of that. This is serious, and it is worthy that you are taking time to fight this battle. The gentleman from Georgia, the gentleman from Florida,
Very
distinguished
briefly,
gentleman from
very
Florida, who
briefly,
also
Mr.
is in
Chairman.
the same
Yes,
circumstance.
as I spoke earlier, Mr. Chairman, one of the things we are not addressing is flood insurance, and all of us know how critical that is. I, like Mr. Weber, have issues at home. Colleagues of ours, Mr. Posey, Mr. Mast, and Francis Rooney, as well as Tom Rooney. We have been working on, and Mario Diaz-Balart, on issues having to do with Lake Okeechobee and a dam that's referred to as the Hoover Dam, and the need of the Army Corps of Engineers to expedite matters with reference to shoring up that dam. What happens is when the lake gets high, they release water to the east and to the west, and it's damaging to our tourism industry. And so I'm fully supportive of your amendments being made in order. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. The gentleman from Alabama. Gentleman does not seek time. The gentleman from Colorado. And you don't have any questions to yourself?
No, no questions for myself at this point.
Good. We consider you to be a witness at this same time. This is the time the judge speaks about how he gets opportunities. You are a witness and a questioner at your own trial.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to ask myself questions.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's like, you're schizophrenic and so are you. Both sides of that coin, you get answered. Good. Thank you very much, and I appreciate the gentleman. The gentlewoman from Wyoming does not seek any question. Mr. Weber, storm was a long time ago. A lot of work has gone into this. Your leadership and the leadership of the gentleman, Mr. Poe, the gentleman, Mr. Culverson, among others, has been exemplary. And our prayers are still with you. Our prayers are still with Judge Hastings, or Mr. Corbella, others who've been impacted, the Rooneys, both the gentlemen. We're going to try and bring this bill to the floor today. We're going to try and bring what we believe is the right thing after hearing from the Texas delegation, the Florida delegation. I hope you engaged and felt like you made progress. I hope you feel like that people did not just take an easy out and take what the administration wanted. I hope you recognize that it's probably not perfect, but it's darn better than what it could have been. I appreciate your leadership. Judge, I appreciate your leadership and a part of that team that worked together. If the gentleman, please remember we have an Austin stenographer, and that anything you brought in writing should be left for her so she can complete the record of the transcript today.
Okay.
Not only of your exemplary performance, but of the information that you wish the committee to have on record.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to take one last opportunity to wish you all a very Merry Christmas.
Thank you, sir.
You bet.
Okay, is there any other member that would seek to give testimony to the HR 4667, HR 4667? Seeing none, this now closes the hearing portion, and the chairman will be in receipt of a motion from the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant a rule providing for the consideration of Senate Amendment to H.R. 1370, the Department of Homeland Security Blue Campaign Authorization Act of 2017. The rule makes an order, motion offered by the chair of the Committee on Appropriations or its designee that the House concur in the Senate amendment with an amendment consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 115-52. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the motion. The rule provides that the Senate amendment and motion shall be considered as read. The rule provides 1 hour of debate on the motion equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations. Section 2 of the rule provides for consideration of H.R. 4667, making further supplemental appropriations for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2018 for disaster assistance for Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria, and the calendar year 2017 wildfires, and for any other purposes under a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill and provides that it shall be considered as read. The rule provides that the amendments printed in the Rules Committee report shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions of the bill as amended. The rule provides that Clause 2E of Rule 21 shall not apply during consideration of the bill. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions. Section 3 of the rule provides that on any legislative day of the first session of the 115th Congress after December 21st, 2017, the journal of the proceedings of the previous day shall be considered as approved, and the chair may at any time declare the House adjourned to meet at a date and time to be announced by the chair in declaring the adjournment. Section 4 of the rule provides that on any legislative day of the second session of the 115th Congress before January 8, 2018, the Speaker may dispense with organizational and legislative business. The journal of the proceedings of the previous day shall be considered as approved if applicable, and the chair may be at any time declare the House adjourned to meet at a date and time to be announced by the chair in declaring the adjournment. Section 5 of the rule provides that the Speaker may appoint members to perform the duties of chair for the duration of the period addressed by Sections 3 and 4. Section 6 of the rule provides that each day during the period addressed by Section 3 and 4 of the resolution shall not constitute calendar days for the purposes of Section 7 of the War Powers Resolution. Finally, Section 7 of the rule provides that each day during the period addressed by Sections 3 and 4 of the resolution shall not constitute a legislative day for the purposes of Clause 7 of Rule 13.
You've now heard the motion from the gentleman from Oklahoma. I'll take 1 minute. The rule is one rule, two measures. The first is the Senate amendment to H.R. 1370. It makes an order, a motion to concur in the Senate amendment, with the amendment consists of the text of the continued resolution, 1 hour debate to the Appropriations Committee. It also includes a second measure, which would also require being voted on. Emergency disaster aid package, closed rule, get another record here for the gentleman from Florida. Self-executes, Mimi Walters 1 and Jennifer Gonzalez Colon. Number 2, it's 1 hour debate to the Appropriations Committee, MTR, motion to recommit. It provides recess authority for December and January district work period. And it would mean that if we're able to accomplish this, then we can sing the song and we'll be home for Christmas. Is there amendment or discussion?
Yes, there is, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
I have an amendment to the rule. I move to make an order, give the necessary waivers for the amendment to the House amendment to the Senate amendment to H.R. 1370 by Representative Lujan Grisham, number 4, which would add the text of the DREAM Act, H.R. 3440, to the end of the CR. And since we've already self-executed 2 amendments, I would certainly like to see this added or at least allowed to be discussed on the floor. I think history's going to show that this was one of the most duplicitous things we've ever done. Those young people were told they had to come forward and register and say they were undocumented and where they lived. And then the rug was pulled out of them, and that protection was taken away, and they are being picked up and detained And as I understood this morning, suicide rate is pretty high. But once they are no longer covered, once they're undocumented, their school is over, their jobs are over. And since they contribute mightily to the tax base of this country, because they do work and do contribute and pay taxes, I think in the future, people will write textbooks about what we did to 800,000 young people who were Americans in every way but on paper. So I certainly hope that we will give good consideration to allowing this amendment to be made in order.
Discussion? Well, I would hope that the second paragraph of the letter that written says, and the Congress respectfully after due consideration, including bipartisan relationships with each other, reached an opportunity to resolve the matter. I expect that to be done very quickly, not quick enough for your amendment.
No, it isn't.
I respect your position.
Seriously.
All I'm saying is I hope there will be a second paragraph written that will tell the end of the story, not the disappointment.
I'm not altogether clear where this ship is sailing anyway. I think it's pretty ad hoc.
Well,
And some days we have hearings and some days we don't. And then this emergency meetings and no committee action and no anything. And I really don't know that this is going to wait until some time when everybody thinks they meet the purpose or determine how they're going to build a wall or whatever else they're going to do. But these are human beings.
well,
And many of them are very young.
we engaged the gentleman, Mr. Polis, who said like-minded people in the same room are struggling to come to the same answer. So I'm with you.
Well, let's help them.
Well,
Let's
he-
help them.
he's-
Let's put
he's
this
worthy
on the
of
floor
help.
and vote it. What do you
He's
say?
worthy of help. Okay.
All right.
All right. Those in favor of the amendment, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No.
Roll call, please.
Noes have it. Noes have it. Gentleman will ask for roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess? No. Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins? No. Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne? No. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse? No. Mr. Buck? Ms. Cheney? Ms. Cheney? No. Ms. Slaughter?
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter? Aye. Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman? No.
Clerk will report.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
Amendment's not agreed to, not agreed to. Further amendment or discussion, the gentleman from Massachusetts.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order en bloc and provide the appropriate waivers for amendments to H.R. 4667 offered by our colleague from Texas, Mr. Weber, numbers 3, 4, and 7. He waited here for a very long time, and which one? Did you withdraw? I'm sorry.
I believe 7 was taken out.
We've gone to withdraw all, we want to make that point get on record, but we have.
So you withdrawn all your amendments? All right.
Thank you. I'm not sure that everybody.
Well, then I will withdraw the amendment, but I thought they were good amendments, and I hope in fact that,
We realize the lateness of the hour.
well.
But we worry about
And even with the latest of the hour, we're the Rules Committee, and we should respect the urgency of the hour. But in any event, if you withdrew them, I'm not going to offer them. So
I appreciate the gentleman hearing not only Mr. Weber, but taking up the cause, and thank you very much. Further amendment or discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule, and I move the committee make an order and provide necessary waivers for an amendment by me to the continuing resolution with the text consisting of the following. None of the funds appropriated in the Continuing Appropriations Act of 2018, Division D of Public Law 115-56, may be used to deport recipients of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals Program. And with your permission, I would offer brief discussion, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, we had a rather substantial amount of dialogue today on the subject. And among the things that some of us learned was that the status of the people that are here under the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals Program is volatile in the sense that each day a significant number of them losing their status. Some of those persons are subject to deportation. It would seem more than reasonable that we would disallow those deportations until such time as we have addressed the remedy and the necessary discussion nationally that you feel and others that should take place with reference to this matter. As you know, Mr. Chairman, I have been a lead person working through the years with reference to Central Americans who sought temporary protective status because of the conditions in their respective countries, more specifically Honduras, Nicaragua, and El Salvador. And I, for years, even before coming to Congress, and as a member of Congress, have sought temporary protective status for Haitians, and will continue to do so because of the conditions that are extant in their country. These young people that are here under the DACA provision, all of us know what their status is, and I shouldn't belabor it, but we certainly shouldn't deport any of them. Let's just use one example. What if a deferred action youngster is in the military and his status or her status expires tomorrow? Then they are eligible for deportation even after having served our country, as many of the DACA people do. I don't think that's right. And I agree with Mr. Byrne that there should be active discussion ongoing with reference to border security and any other matters having to do with immigration. But the urgency of this particular matter should be addressed now. And therefore, I think at the very least, we should not deport any of the persons who lose their status. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman available for questions? Does the gentleman open for questions? What is the due process status under what you described for a person who's in the military?
I don't know.
See, that's the reason why I'm reticent to offer relief when I have not studied it. The gentleman knows I tried to study to be prepared for the amendments that we have. So I want the gentleman to know that I appreciate his advocacy. And I do respect it also. And I'm not saying I disagree with it, but there are questions that I do not know. And it's easy for me to guess what might or might not be in the law, but there is a due process. Under that, I would envision that I don't know what the answer is for a person that's in the military that you brought up. Not just for them to be picked up on a military reservation, but some process that we go through, and I'm sorry I did not come prepared. I'm saying I should probably understand this.
Yeah, if the gentleman
And
would yield.
especially since it's a driving issue of our nation at the time. So I will tell you, I will bone up on this.
Right.
To where I'm better prepared to then defend, deny, or support something that you might bring up. But I think we don't know the answers to
Right.
these things.
I understand that, Mr. Chairman, and perhaps I chose as an analogy a poor example. And the simple fact of the matter is that we know that these persons were either brought to America when they were children or have status that we took cognizance of and allowed them to be here under the deferred action. So I would think that military person, as well as anyone else, would be contemplated by the amendment that I offered, and that is that even if there is a due process for them, that they would not be at any point in time deported until such time as there's a total resolution with reference to
Yes, sir.
DACA.
And all I'm suggesting is, I don't know enough to know what the due process is, so I can't assume, And I do respect the gentleman, and I know he hears my point, too. Is
I
there
hear
further discussion? Gentleman, Mr. McGovern.
Well, I want to support the gentleman's amendment. I mean, we spent a lot of time this morning talking about the need to enact the DREAM Act, and we heard a lot of rationalization as to justifying the inaction of this Congress thus far. I mean, the president took away their status on September 7th. It's now December 21st. And then we were told, oh, we need more discussions and we need more committee hearings without any understanding of why the committees of jurisdiction haven't done anything up to this point. But what we do know as a fact is that contrary to what some thought, that was that everybody was okay until the end of March, people are losing their status each and every day. People are losing their jobs each and every day. And if somebody gets picked up for speeding or a broken taillight, and whether they're on leave from the military or whether they're just or they're working at a business, they are subject to basically being deported. And so, at a minimum, let us err on the side of caution to say that as you try to figure out what you guys are going to do, let us not deport these people. They are incredible assets to our community. They are working. They are obeying the law. They are making this country great. We should celebrate them, but we should not be deporting them. And I think, at a minimum, this is a reasonable, rational thing that we ought to be able to debate and vote on the House floor. I thank the gentleman. I yield back my time.
Yes, sir.
Okay, we're going to vote on the motion. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Noes have it, noes have it. Gentleman asks for a recorded vote. Roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess? No. Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins? No. Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne? No. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse? No. Mr. Buck? Ms. Cheney? Ms. Cheney? No. Ms. Slaughter?
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter? Aye. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Polis? Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman?
Clerk report
No.
the total.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
Amendment's not agreed to, not agreed to. Further amendment or discussion. Gentleman from Colorado.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move that the committee additionally provide a rule for consideration of H.R. 3440, the DREAM Act, as a standalone measure under an open rule with 3 hours of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary. And if I can speak to this amendment, I think this is a good compromise amendment. It will basically allow the DREAM Act as the basis of what gets advanced to the floor, but it'll be under an open rule. So during that several-hour period, members on both sides of the aisle will be able to refine any last-minute elements of what needs to be done to prevent over 100 people from falling out of legal presence every day and to address the issue going forward. I know that there's, as been indicated in the testimony, various groups that have thoughts and have worked on it, many bipartisan. My understanding, there might be some Republican-only groups working on this too. It's time to address this on the floor of the House. I think there will be a number of amendments, and I think the House can work its way and get through this. I have great confidence in the integrity and abilities of the gentlemen and gentlewomen that make up this body on both sides of the aisle. And we just need to give the House a chance to do their work. So I think this is a good answer. It means that the Rules Committee itself will provide an open rule, and I think that we can hash through any additional issues that divide us and reach a product that we as Americans can be proud of, and that our aspiring American neighbors and friends will also be proud of. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I would offer just a little bit of my words to the gentleman. I'll be going home, I hope. I'll be knowing my stepson that serves in the United States Navy in Pearl Harbor, and his colleagues in the United States military are going to get only temporary relief also for another month. This body seemingly finds a way to argue and fight. I do recognize that people do need the opportunity. I would also say that we're not dealing fairly with the military. And this body is going to have to come to real grips with what it's doing. And I'm very, very much in the corner of trying to resolve things. And yet here we are fighting as much as we can, and we can't even find relief for our military. And it's a circumstance that we've worked ourselves into as two bodies, and we got to get better. We're going to come back, and we're going to present what I think will be a fair opportunity, as we said we would, for what you're fighting for. Today, we're not even doing the same thing for our military. And we got a lot of soul searching to do over Christmas. That's my comments over what we're doing. Anybody else? Vote now be on the polls. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. Noes have it.
Roll call, please.
Gentleman asks for roll call vote.
Mr.
Call
Cole?
for poll of committee.
Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess? No. Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins? No. Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne? No. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse? No. Mr. Buck? Ms. Cheney? Ms. Cheney? No. Ms. Slaughter?
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter? Aye. Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Polis?
Aye.
Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman? No.
Clerk report.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
Amendment's not agreed to for the minute of discussion. Seeing none now, vote will now be on the motion from the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
The ayes have it, the ayes have it. And
Roll call, please.
Gentlewoman asks for a roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess? Aye. Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins? Aye. Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne? Aye. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse? Aye. Mr. Buck? Ms. Cheney? Ms. Cheney? Aye. Ms. Slaughter?
No.
Ms. Slaughter? No. Mr. McGovern?
No.
Mr. McGovern? No. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings? No. Mr. Polis? Mr. Polis? No. Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman?
Clerk report the total.
8 yeas, 4 nays.
The motion is agreed to accordingly. The gentleman, floor manager for Republicans will be the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall.
And Mr. McGovern.
Mr. McGovern will be handling this for the minority. Is there anything further that we need to address today, except to thank Nate Plank for his work, for the committee, for the staffs that have participated, for our time to be together for the morning. Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Yes.